Utah has a child abuse problem. Participants at a Prevent Child Abuse conference heard that the state ranks 8th in child abuse and 1st in sex abuse of children.
And welcome back to We're the People. This is your host, Jason Preston, again with my beautiful bride, Alexia. It's good to have you back, baby.
Few and far between these days, but yes, it's good to be here.
It's been a wild year, and we're thankful to all of you for, those who've been fighting along with us and supporting us. I'm going to ask right out of the gate, and you're going to understand why when you get into the show. Please go to our website, wearethepeople.org, and scroll and subscribe to the newsletter. You're going to understand why. We've been deplatformed before, and not from Google or not from YouTube, actually from someone who hacked into our email. And so we know there are a lot of people who do not want this information out. We're literally under a lawsuit. We're $40,000+ in. And we're not making a lot of friends, and so if you value this content, we ask that you subscribe so we can continue to get you content. I'm actually going to read the intro today because it's the significance of the content. I don't want to just wing this, but let's roll into this. It's with a very heavy heart that we're filming this show today. As Alexia and I have spoken to countless victims, the weight has at times been too heavy to bear. It has wrecked our world to see the pain in the eyes of these victims, broken our hearts, and challenged our very perceptions of reality. Had we not sat face to face with so many victims and survivors, we would not believe what we have learned to be true ourselves. It has shattered our faith in the justice system, in politicians, and most painful of all, religious leaders that we have held on the highest of pedestals. At one point, the burden we carried was enough that we tried to leave the state and shut down the podcast completely. You saw in June we really did nothing. We had no desire to see, let alone expose, such painful things. However, the more we tried to run away, the more the universe collapsed around us, until we realized this is no longer a choice but an obligation. And regardless of the consequences which await us, we know God will hold us accountable if we walk away from this assignment. Dragons are symbolically real, and the longer they go ignored, the bigger they get. Michael and the Lord fought against the dragon before the foundations of this earth, and that battle continues to rage today and is coming to a fever pitch. There are dragons growing in the shadows of these mountains, and victims and people like Glenn Pace have begged us to wake up and face them. I understand it's scary and ugly to look at such darkness and evil, but the cost of ignoring the dragon and such evil is apparent when you see Utah as the highest state in the nation for child sex abuse. We are by no means perfect members, and by no means perfect at all. But I believe and have always believed that the gospel of Jesus Christ was restored. But I can no longer deny the corruption, abuse, and evil that has infiltrated the church. The story we are sharing today has been heavy on my mind for some time. And we know that just as we have faced a lawsuit for exposing the LDS Church of Satan, there will be consequences for what we will show today, as well as the voices of victims we continue to elevate that expose imposters who have infiltrated the church at the highest levels. What we share will rock the foundation of this state, but what we pray is that our foundation is not built upon men, but on our Savior Jesus Christ. While the opinions shared today do not represent We Are the People, and I do not align with everything shared, I believe the majority of what will be shared today to be true, and I believe it enough to be willing to face the consequences of exposing such powerful and organized forces of evil. It was actually very foretelling today, this morning, before we filmed this, that I got had one of our bigger donors reach out and upset with the content that we're sharing. And I almost want to read you the text exchange. I won't, but the bottom line is, we realize we will lose a lot of support. I realize we will probably at some point lose everyone's support. And at some point I realized, what happens when you tell truths like this or expose this type of evil is you will be discredited. But the fact of the matter is, like I said, we don't have a choice. This is something we feel from the bottom of our heart needs to be done. Alexia, anything you want to share before we get started?
Sure. So, I'm sure some of our viewers that have been watching shows lately know that I haven't been on the show, and it's because a lot of this has been so heavy. So I've had to distance myself from it because you start looking into the darkness and the abyss for long enough, it consumes you. And I fell prey to that. So it's not by choice that I'm here, but like you said, an obligation. And I've tried to keep a fair distance from it. So while I'm aware of a lot of this content, I'll be learning a lot of it with many of our viewers. So I'll try to ask the questions that I know many of you have. Growing up Jewish, this all is very new to me, the LDS Church and the way things work. So I have somewhat of a arm's length relationship where I don't have as much emotion, but I know and recognize many of you will have very strong visceral reactions to this. So try to listen with an open mind and know that what we're sharing is what we believe, what our own opinions are, and also what can be backed up with facts and court documents.
Yeah, no, this has been, and I feel, and I apologize in advance to our, listeners. This is not something we ever wanted to see. It's been something very, very heavy, very painful for us, because there's been so many people that, it's not just in the church, it's in our government, seeing corruption at the highest levels. I mean, it's, even Trump, I don't want to see that. I don't want to believe that people are good. I want to believe that people are there to save us, but I recognize that this is difficult for people. It's been very, very difficult on us, but our loyalty must be to the kids. It must be these children who, I promise you, are being trafficked, who are being abused. And as you hear the story today of these children, I don't care who you are. I don't care what your position is. Right is right. And if we ever will put anyone in, I don't care what position, over children, we've got a problem. And that's on us, and God will hold us accountable. So as we start, I want to share this clip.
Decades-old sexual abuse and LDS church cover-up allegations now resurfacing again. At least 6 people suing the daughter and son-in-law of Church President Russell M. Nelson.
Jim Stewart looked through the decades-old allegations. Jim, there are claims of abuse on kids as young as 1 year old.
That's just one of the allegations in this 79-page suit. The defendants filed a motion to dismiss this thing. They want it thrown out. Their motion is 141 pages. Here it is right here. I read through all of them today, and the defendants, they are going to put up a fight. The allegations of sexual abuse stem back to the 1980s, accusing a John and Jane Doe of an LDS church leader that held touching parties and sexually abused kids as young as 1. The suit claims after the victims came forward, church elder Neil A. Maxwell blessed them and told them to forgive and forget. The suit claims if church leaders had taken further action with police, the abuse might not have happened. But it wasn't until court records to dismiss the suit filed Wednesday in federal court show that the John and Jane Doe defendants are actually Church President Russell M. Nelson's daughter, Brenda Miles, and her husband, Richard. In their dismissal motion, the Miles deny all allegations. They claim the victims only came forward after meeting with a psychologist alleged to be at the center of a satanic ritual scare back in the 1980s. The LDS Church was not named as a defendant in the suit, but because it involves the daughter and son-in-law of President Nelson, the church sent a statement saying, in part, these allegations of interference or cover-up are baseless and offensive. Law enforcement investigated this matter in the 1980s and took no action against the church or its leaders. So I asked the attorney for the plaintiffs why file this now, and he responded by saying because these alleged victims now have a voice, they want to be believed, and they want justice for living with the shame and pain of what happened to them as children. The defendants go on to say that the statute of limitations has passed, and that is grounds and a basis for this suit to be thrown out. We have put a copy of this claim, this complaint, up on our website, KUTV.com, if you would like to see it. It has been fully redacted. Guys, back to you.
6 people known only as John and Jane Doe have filed a lawsuit alleging sexual abuse and a cover-up by prominent people within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Today, some of the alleged victims spoke to Fox 13.
abused me my whole childhood.
The lawsuit alleges 3 children were abused by their father back in the 1980s.
We were certainly bribed with candy.
It also claims the children were also repeatedly abused at touching parties that involved Richard and Brenda Miles, the daughter and son-in-law of LDS Church President Russell M. Nelson.
Weren't believed, that they were ostracized, that they were almost treated like lepers.
Fox 13 does not typically name alleged sex abuse victims, but some of the plaintiffs agreed to talk to us on condition we not disclose their identities.
Victims need to be listened and heard and have a voice.
Their mother claims she reported it to police, but they did nothing. The LDS Church also did nothing, she says.
I assumed that the highest leaders in the church would want to help my children heal, that the perpetrators would be put in jail. I was very quickly disillusioned of that.
The mother says she divorced, her husband remarried. That's where Jane Doe 3 claims he abused her and her siblings. Her stepfather committed suicide in 1995.
But if somebody had done the right thing the first time, then the abuse never would have happened, and it was pretty horrific.
The lawsuit accuses the Miles of using their status within the LDS Church to cover up crimes. The lawsuit originally named the Miles under pseudonyms, but their lawyer chose to publicly reveal their identities.
There is no truth to these allegations. The Miles did not abuse these children or anyone else.
Jim Jardine says police investigated this and found nothing. He says police also deny the church influenced the investigation and suggested the alleged victims have false memories.
These allegations were investigated in the 1980s by 3 different law enforcement agencies who found no evidence of any child sex abuse ring in Bountiful and filed no charges against my clients.
The plaintiffs insist it did happen and they want justice.
Their lives and comfort and whatever it was, it was not more important than me in my life.
While the lawsuit itself does not name President Nelson, the plaintiff's lawyer suggested he could be added later.
But we believe there'll be additional evidence that we'll have to show that this person, along with other people, worked in tandem with the defendants to basically cover up the crime of the sexual assaults, the sexual abuse.
Now, in a statement, the LDS Church says it handles issues like this with the utmost seriousness. The church says the allegations of interference or cover-up are baseless and offensive, and they say this was investigated in the 1980s with no action taken. Now, the Miles' attorney filed a motion to dismiss within hours of the plaintiff suing. A federal judge will have to decide whether or not this lawsuit goes forward. We have posted both the lawsuit and the motion to dismiss for you to read at fox13now.com. Live in studio, Ben Winslow, Fox 13 News, Utah.
And I will tell you, I want to thank the 2 people who are going to be introducing because it has been very, very difficult to get this out to people. There's been several people who are aware of the details of this, and I will tell you, quite frankly, nobody wants to talk about it. So I want to, appreciate them for their bravery and their willingness to speak. First off, I want to welcome Justin Riggs. Justin, how are you today?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, Justin, you've kind of pulled the lid off this a couple of years ago, and been kind of leading the charge on exposing this. And there's a lot that I've learned from you, and I'm just very thankful for you being willing to join us today.
I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
And again, in studio, we've had him on here a few times. He's been an incredible whistleblower here in our backyard. You've seen him on several of our shows. We welcome again
Tyler.
Tyler, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, not just with you today, but with one of my heroes and mentors in this subject, Justin, as well. He's who introduced me to many of the elements of this story that we are going to share with you today.
Okay, well, you guys are the pros, and I appreciate all the effort, the work you guys have invested in helping to lay this out in such a professional manner. Tyler, would you mind go ahead and taking the lead here?
Yeah. Just to start, like you mentioned, very few are willing to talk about this, so finding qualified individuals to explain it is hard to come by. And I definitely don't feel like one of those qualified individuals, but Justin definitely is. I can say that I've put hundreds of hours of research into this and chased down many leads. and this is going to be my best effort, and I appreciate your patience and willingness to have us on. So I want to start by diving into the allegations that are brought forth in that lawsuit. And fair warning, trigger warning, there's going to be some graphic testimony of child abuse and strong allegations of abuse and questioning about a cover-up at the highest levels of the LDS Church. So just fair warning. So this is going to give the audience a good high-level view of the allegations and situation. And once I'm finished with this first section, Justin's going to go into his presentation. And he's going to explore some of the key points of the lawsuit, as well as additional information that points to very curious patterns and connections that should evoke some additional curiosity by the audience. Justin's going to be asking some difficult questions and prompting us to consider whether or not this case, which was eventually dismissed without even being heard, had any merits and what this all means to us today. Justin, do you want to give a brief introduction, or maybe we can both do it, of this topic, kind of who the main characters are and why you believe this subject is significant?
Sure. So the case was brought by several plaintiffs from two separate families that claimed to be victimized by a diagnosed pedophile by the name of Bill Karstensen, who by the time this lawsuit was filed had committed suicide. And then Dick and Brenda Miles were the named plaintiffs. And Brenda Miles is the daughter of Russell M. Nelson. And so the basis of the suit was simply that Dick and Brenda Miles had used their power and influence to what would the right way of saying that be? To interfere with the investigation and to leverage their relationships with powerful people inside of the church, like their father and Neil A. Maxwell, to make sure that neither church discipline nor legal consequences were suffered for the alleged abuse that took place.
Perfect. Thank you. So, again, I'm going to be reading from the actual court documents. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, so feel free to pause and read through if you want to go into more detail. But basically, I'll start right here on this first page where we have all of the Jane and John Does as the plaintiffs, and then the defendants, Doe male defendant 1 and Doe female defendant 2.
And Tyler, what year was this roughly where all of these alleged activities were happening?
This was in the mid-1980s when these things happened, but this complaint was filed in 2018.
Past the statute of limitations.
That's complicated, and I think Justin's going to go into that a little bit. So I'll, leave that question unanswered for now, but I'm sure Justin will get into that later. All right, so reading from these first documents, and feel free to interrupt me anytime you want clarification or have any questions, but basically this first page here is just explaining who is coming forward. And you've got Jane Does 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as John Does 1 and 2. And they bring this complaint and request for jury trial against defendants Doe 1 male and Doe female 2. So the Jane Does 1 through 4 are actually children who are now adults from two separate families. These are the families of Bill Karstensen with his first wife and Bill Karstensen with his second wife, stepchildren, and biological children. So it's kind of a mix of both. The defendants are, as Justin explained in his introduction, they are Dick and Brenda Miles. And again, Brenda is President Nelson's daughter. All right, so going to the next page here in section B.
And by the way, we will have a link to all this in the show notes so that we do not want anyone taking our word on these things. We want you to have all the information yourself. This stuff should not be buried. This should be accessible to the people.
Thank you. So B, at the bottom of the page, sexual crimes committed against Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, and John Doe 1. So Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2 and John Doe 1 are all siblings. Jane Doe 1 is the eldest daughter of Mother 1, who's going to come into the picture later. And Jane Doe 2 is actually the third oldest child of Mother 1. John Doe 1 is the only son. So these are the biological children of a sexual predator hereinafter referred to as perpetrator. The perpetrator is no longer a living person, having committed suicide in 1995. Defendants Doe Male 1 and Doe Female 2, along with perpetrator who were in the same LDS ward in Bountiful, Utah, committed sexual abuse when the opportunity allowed against Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2, and after he reached approximately a year old John Doe 1 from approximately early 1984 to late 1985, or early January 1986 in Bountiful, Utah. There were other similarly aged children believed to be in the same LDS ward who, along with plaintiffs, were also victims of these crimes. Doe 1 male defendant and Doe 2 female defendant, the Mileses, led what they called touching parties at their home and at the perpetrator's home. These touching parties were sometimes attended by acquaintances and friends of defendants and perpetrator. In addition, a 16-year-old babysitter, who was a young woman in the same LDS ward, would be present from time to time. It is believed that this babysitter was both a victim of crimes against her and a perpetrator of crimes. This 16-year-old babysitter is no longer living, as it is believed that she, like the perpetrator, committed suicide. The parties would occur 1 or 2 times per month, seemingly whenever there was opportunity for the adults to isolate the children. During these touching parties, some of the plaintiffs in Plaintiff Group 1 would be forced to undress and perform acts of sexual perversion. Typically, the touching parties would begin with adults instructing the children to, quote-unquote, put on a show for them, including dancing, and ending with the children undressing, while the adults applauded and encouraged. Once the children were naked, defendants, perpetrator, and any others present would sexually assault the children by touching their genitals and vaginally and anally penetrating them with fingers and objects such as crayons or candy. Doe male defendant 1 and female defendant 2, along with perpetrator and others present at these parties, would force the children to touch the genitals and or breasts of others present. The children were additionally forced to put their mouths on and lick the genitals of Doe 1 male defendant and perpetrator. Though 1 male defendant and perpetrator would not fully undress, but would expose their penises to the children and coerce and manipulate the children to perform these vile acts, which the adults would call, quote-unquote, marriage lessons. On at least one occasion, the children were forced to watch as perpetrator had sex with / statutorily raped the 16-year-old babysitter. On another occasion, perpetrator had sex with the children's paternal grandmother, perpetrator's mother, while the children were forced to watch. Furthermore, Doe 1 male defendant, Doe 2 female defendant, the Mileses, and perpetrator, Bill Carsonson, would put candy on the children's genitals and force the other children to lick the candy off. Jane Doe 1 remembers this occurring when her brother, John Doe 1, was just a year old. Defendants and or perpetrator, depending on the occasion, would remove John Doe 1's clothing, touch his penis until he was erect, put a powdery candy on his erect penis, and make the other children, including his siblings, lick the candy off him. Over time, Doe 1 male defendant and Doe 2 female defendant, the Miles, began videotaping the touching parties. Jane Doe 1, who was the oldest of the children at the time of the assaults, recalls the defendants videotaping the children dancing and undressing and continuing to film as the sexual assaults and rapes occurred. In addition to the children of Plaintiff Group 1, other children from the ward were also victims of sexual assaults and rapes at these parties. So what I'd like to do now is read portions of Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, Jane Doe 5, and John Doe 1's declarations. These are their actual statements of fact, as sworn, as adults, but these are sworn affidavits under penalty of perjury. All right, now this should be on the screen as well for you, audience. Declaration of Jane Doe 1. Jane Doe 1 was born approximately 1977. We're going to skip down to 2 from approximately 1983 to 1986, while I was 5 to 8 years old, my siblings and I were sexually assaulted on numerous occasions by my father, Bill Carstensen, who was known as perpetrator. Doe 1 male and Doe 2 female, the Carstensens, who were in our local ward, my grandmother, so this is their paternal grandmother, Bill Carstensen's mother, and a teenage babysitter who was also in our ward. There were also other teenagers and adults involved from time to time. The abuse included touching parties, which were gathering of adults, teenagers, and children. The adults involved were primarily perpetrator and the Mileses. My teenage babysitter, who also babysat the Mileses' children, was named C.W. When the touching parties first started, my younger sister, Jane Doe 5, and the daughter of the Mileses, who was Jane Doe 5's age, were involved. As I got older, the younger daughter of the Mileses became involved, as did my younger siblings, Jane Doe 2 and John Doe 1. I also remember seeing B.D., another young girl from the ward, at some of the parties. These parties would happen frequently, sometimes on a weekly basis, sometimes 1 to 2 times a month. I remember having touching parties on Saturday and then going to church on Sunday and having Sister Brenda Miles, aka Sister Defendant 2, be our primary chorister, and having her husband, Defendant 1, Dick Miles, sit up on the stand since he was in the bishopric. Typically, the touching parties would start with the adults telling us to quote-unquote put on a show for them. These shows were usually dances that me, Jane Doe 5, and the oldest daughter of the Mileses would perform. These dances would always end with undressing. I remember this is when an applause from the adults and our babysitter would get the loudest. After we were naked, the adults and teenage babysitter would sexually assault us. This included touching our private parts and penetrating us vaginally and anally with their fingers, and sometimes using objects like crayons or candy to penetrate us. I recall Dick Miles, D1 defendant, being the meanest of the adults. He seemed to encourage the others to participate. There were usually treats and bribes involved at every stage of the parties. The finaling included the adults masturbating me and the other children. The adults forced me and the other children to touch and masturbate them. The adults would refer to the touching as quote-unquote marriage lessons. I was forced to touch and lick Dick Miles and Bill Carstensen, my father's genitals. Defendant 1 and perpetrator, Dick and Bill Carstensen, did not always get completely naked, but would expose their penises and make me touch and suck them. I was also forced to touch the bare breasts of Brenda Miles, Defendant 2, as well as my teenage babysitter, C.W. It seemed to me that Defendant 1, Dick Miles, was in charge of the parties and would encourage all the kids to perform. He would also encourage the involvement of adults. At one of these parties, I saw my father, perpetrator, having sex with our babysitter, C.W. At another, I saw him having sex with our grandmother, L.S.
That's his mother.
Correct.
Which, again, when you read, especially a lot of the ritual abuse in the victim statements, you hear so much, it's generational. It is parents and bloodlines, parents abusing kids abusing, and so you see so much of this abuse generationally, that parents abusing their kids. This is why there's just such a concern to us.
Yes. Going down to 8. These parties would take place at my house, at the Miles' house, and at my grandmother's house. These parties seemed to happen nearly every time the babysitter would watch us, or when our mom was out of town or away from the house. There were times when my mom and Perp and my father, Bill Carstensen, were on a date, and the parties would happen at my house with just the Mileses and our babysitter, CW. And sometimes with an older adult man and or friends of CW, the babysitter, being present. When I became older, Jane Doe 2 and John Doe 1 were also present at these parties. I remember Jane Doe 2 being touched, similar to what happened to Jane Doe 5 and me. There were times when each of these adults penetrated Jane Doe 2's vagina with their fingers. There were other times when Jane Doe 2 was penetrated with objects When John Doe 1 was just over a year old, he became an object of these parties as well. And I will skip over this. Again, it's all a lot of the same thing, and you're free to pause and read through this. But I did want to mention this, that there were often threats or punishments that we wouldn't tell what was happening. Some of these threats or punishment, including making us drink a concoction containing urine and feces. Other times, we were forced to drink coffee.
Sickos.
After drinking the coffee, the adults proceeded to shame us for being bad since we were breaking the word of wisdom. They explained that since we were wicked, nobody would believe us, so we better not tell anyone.
Makes you wonder if they put anything else in the coffee, too, for these alleged incidents.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of that as well. There was drugging allegedly involved. 13. Throughout the years of abuse, my dad and the Mileses and others, I prayed to Heavenly Father for the hurting to stop. After we disclosed the names of our abusers, my mom kicked my dad out of the house. We then spent some time with my Belle and Papa, my maternal grandparents, at their condo in Hawaii. While I was in Hawaii, my maternal mother typed a poem that I wrote about the abuse I suffered at the hands of my father and the Mileses. The poem is attached as Exhibit A. We're going to read a small portion of that in a little bit. Elder Maxwell was a friend of my maternal grandparents. Elder Maxwell gave me and each of my younger siblings a blessing by laying his hands on my head. During that blessing, he said something to the effect that the abusers had made, quote-unquote, horrible choices. He talked about how God would be the judge of these adult abusers and that I needed to forgive. So I want to stop there and pause for just a second, because I want to acknowledge that this apostle, Neil A. Maxwell, is acknowledging and giving credibility to these allegations. Let that sink in for just a minute. My dad, Bill Carsonson, Perp, baptized me when I turned 8 years old, during the time that he and the Mileses and others were doing these terrible things. After disclosing the abuse, I expressed a desire to be rebaptized, as I believed my original baptism was tainted and should not count because my father was not a worthy priesthood holder. This request for baptism was granted sometime after Elder Maxwell gave me a blessing. All right, let's go through and just read a small portion of these heartbreaking journals and poems that Jane Doe 1
She's got to be like 10 years old.
8 years old. She's 8 years old at this time.
Are these the journal entries that's in her writing?
These are typed up.
We'll have a link to the journal entries that she wrote in her writing. And I'll tell you, when you read it and these things in this little girl's journal, it'll break your heart, seeing these. And I believe these kids, and it just breaks your heart that this stuff goes on.
All right. So, first poem. Daddy, I hate you. Daddy, I do. You have done wicked things. And the Mileses, Sister Miles, Brenda Miles, has too. You have made me suck on your penis and took me to your awful mom's. She's worse than you. You have tricked Mommy and lied to her too. You took me to the Mileses, and I'd like to hate you. I truly do hate you. Way worse than I would hate to eat mud. Daddy, I would like to strike you dead. But the good part of you I love more than my own head. We're in Hawaii, I miss you so much. We've truly had such great fun. And read so many stories and had so many treats. But Daddy, I miss you the most when we're on the beach.
So conflicted.
It's heartbreaking. You can tell she loves her dad.
She's messed up.
But she's been
trauma bonded. Of course she loves her
bonded.
dad. Trauma bonding. Of course she loves her dad, but that's why this stuff's so evil.
All right, bear with me 1 second while I bring up. Because these, right now, what we're going to be looking at on the screen are some journal entries that were written by the mother who spoke them, the Jane Doe 1 spoke them to the mother and she wrote them down. But then, as you can see on the screen, she scribbled heavy crayon over the top of it. So I was only able to ferret out a portion.
You know, this is why I'm so upset about, Stuart Adams, the president of the Utah State Senate, is, trying to minimize penalties for, adults abusing children. And you've got Todd Weiler, another Utah State rep, pushing for legislation to minimize penalties for trafficking. And when you see, again, Utah being, the #1 state for child abuse, and this stuff gets covered up. I mean, Alexia and I, we're talking to victims too many. And, and too many times where it's covered up by the church. And again, I'm not here on a warpath against, the church. I love the church. I love the gospel. But I have no tolerance for anybody who covers up and allows little girls like this to continue to be abused. And little boys.
All right, this first portion, and again, I'm just reading excerpts. I am so angry at Daddy and the people who touched us. When we move, it is going to be so fun to be away from this horrible, rotten, disgusting, stinking people. I want to burn up the dress that Grandma gave to my sister. We are going to burn up everything the wicked people gave us. And at the bottom, you can see, I feel, ... I feel, ... I feel. Next page, new journal entry. I feel sad about growing up because I have to leave behind my toys and start paying more interest to friends. And so I start paying more interest to my books. But growing up is fun too, 'cause your body start changing, so you start changing and you get smarter. It was good, we told, even though our prayers weren't answered the way we wanted them to, because we wanted the wicked people to just stop without us telling. And I told the stake president the articles of faith, and he told me what they meant. He kept telling me that I had to have faith. I felt better after I talked to him. It was like throwing up. Why don't you drive me out to Dr. Whitehead whenever I'm feeling bad? I hope Daddy will get better so that Mommy won't get married to somebody else.
Is there a crossover there with the Hamblin girls with the Whitehead?
Not that I'm aware of. Okay.
Dr. Whitehead was involved in several abuse cases, but I don't believe with the Hamblins he was. But just to point out really quickly, Dr. Whitehead also filed in this lawsuit a sworn statement. I don't know if you're going to talk about that at all, Tyler, but just so everybody knows that this doctor was willing to put his reputation and his name on the line as part of this lawsuit.
Yep.
Thanks, Justin.
Excellent. And I also want to point out what she expresses here is actually the truth, that the secrets that are buried deep inside us, they make us sick. And so when she expresses that getting this stuff out is like throwing up, it actually is helping her feel better. When you throw up, you feel better.
Yeah, what does it do when these victims come and they try to talk, and you have the justice system and the people silence them?
Yep. All right, next page. And this again is in the handwriting of the mother, but this is an 8-year-old speaking. She says, I had an excellent appointment with Dr. Whitehead. I talked and I talked and I talked and I talked. And Dr. Whitehead said if I talk 1/10 that good, we'd really see some changes in feelings. So our heart will change color inside. And that is exactly right. Continuing on. Yeah, Dick Miles doesn't get to bear his testimony or be that important thing anymore. It used to make me feel awful. She's referring to Dick Miles being on the stand as a member of the bishopric. Grandma is a scaredy cat. She has a for sale sign in front of her house and is trying to move and run away. She's scared of us. She's just an ounce of brains. it makes me feel triumphant. One day, we'll put her in our car and shove her in our wood-burning stove and keep her there until the police come. Next page. This is her brother's name that's crossed out. It's good that John Doe 2, which is actually the biological son of Mother 2, so it's not even, it's the next, and we'll clarify that maybe a little bit later. This is Mother 2 and biological, and Bill Carsonson's biological son that he would have later. It's good that John Doe 2 was a boy. Otherwise, they would have made John Doe 1, this is her baby brother, put his penis in him. Don't you feel sorry for S and A and T? He'll be raised with this, and they'll take it out on their own kids even more since they don't have so many kids to do it to. Now, what's tragic about this, and Justin, I know, is going to go into this a little bit later, but one of the huge tragic elements of this story is that when there was an opportunity for it to stop, nothing was done, and therefore the perpetrator was able to claim additional victims. And this young girl at age, whatever age she is right now, maybe 9 years old, maybe 10, she is aware of this fact. As an 8, 9, or 10-year-old, she is aware of that fact. Tragic. All right.
So as of now, the only known alleged perpetrators are her father, her grandmother, the Miles,
Dick and Brenda
Miles, but nothing has implicated President Nelson. It's just been his daughter.
Exactly. Yeah, and he never gets implicated in any actual abuse. It's a potential, the alleged cover-up that he, and we'll get into that later, definitely. So continuing on, we're going to just touch very briefly on the next daughter, Jane Doe 5, and she was born in 1979, so she's the next oldest daughter, and the one with the next best memory of what has taken place. And she says, from about 3 to 6 years old, my siblings and I were sexually assaulted on numerous occasions by my father, Bill Carsonson, perpetrator. Our family friends, the Mileses, my grandmother, LS, our teenage babysitter, CW, and a few times by friends of CW, and a man I believed was named DM. And then skipping down, and again, she makes a lot of the same allegations, so we're not going to belabor the point, but she also says, there were times when I was also penetrated with objects like crayons. Again, same pattern that we've seen in other situations. Next page. I also recall being touched on multiple occasions while getting ready for gymnastics class I was in with CM, the Miles' oldest daughter. This seemed to happen every time they took me to do gymnastics with CM. CM plays an important role in this too, and I don't know if we're going to get into it, but I just wanted to point that out because she has a connection actually to the Hamblin case, if you can believe it.
And she's the oldest daughter.
She's the oldest daughter of the Mileses. Skipping now to 10. These touching parties were frequently videotaped. While it seemed that all the adults took turns behind the camera, I recall Brenda Miles doing most of the videotaping. In order to get us to keep the touching parties secret, I recall being threatened and punished. And again, she mentions the coffee situation. All right, skipping to Jane Doe number 2. We're going to have this information on the screen. We're not going to talk terribly much about it. And again, she was really young, born in 82, so her memories would be even less. But she says, though I was too young to remember much of the abuse, from my conversations with my mother, my sisters, and my therapist, I believe that from 1982 to 1985, from when I was a newborn to when I was 3 years old, my siblings and I were sexually assaulted on numerous occasions by my father. And our family friends from our Mormon ward. And she goes into talking about that. I remember thinking that my dad and the Mileses were icky and wicked for the things they did to me. I also remember all the stress that it caused my family. Down to 4, I wanted to point this out. I specifically remember hiding under the tree at Christmas one year in order to get away from my dad and his quote-unquote marriage lessons. All right. And then finally, this is John Doe 1's declaration, and he was born in 1984, and so he only experienced this abuse as a newborn up to 1 year old. And again, he says he's too young to remember any of the abuse, and he doesn't have any recollection of the events that his sisters have detailed, but he does remember how much turmoil these events caused his family. Throughout my life, I have grown up with significant problems such as body shame, chronic depression, and I have felt isolated and uncomfortable in my own skin. I have also had intermittent substance abuse issues. As a child, I had vivid, recurring nightmares of people touching me. It was only in the last few months or so that I discovered that I was videotaped and abused as a baby.
Did those videotapes ever come to light?
Not that I'm aware of.
I mean, this is like the Epstein stuff. And you see this across a lot of the ritual abuse we see is they love to videotape it. They because it's how they keep each other.
That's currency.
That's why no one goes to jail, because there's so many people who are involved in this, and they all have it. This is literally what a secret combination is.
Again, we're going to continue back with the lawsuit, and I appreciate your patience. I know this is a little bit tedious, but again, we would rather give you, the audience, the allegations, the facts of the case, and let you decide.
And there's some very significant things coming. So I know some of this is repetition, but again, to bring such heavy things, we want to make sure the evidence is there.
Okay. So you'll have this page up on the screen, but this is starting with C, the next page of the complaint. In January of 1986, the mother of Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2 and John Doe 1, hereinafter Mother 1, heard from a neighbor that the neighbor's children were being sexually abused. As a precaution, she took Jane Doe 1 to the Intermountain Sexual Abuse Treatment Center, ISAT, to engage in counseling sessions. At these sessions, Jane Doe 1 disclosed that she had been abused by the 16-year-old babysitter who was previously mentioned in the paragraphs above, and 2 unknown teenage boys. Shortly thereafter, Mother 1 spoke with her local LDS bishop and his first counselor about the abuse. Doe 1 male defendant, Dick Miles, who was the second counselor of this LDS ward at the time, was noticeably absent from the meeting. Initially, these men were very supportive of Mother 1's efforts to investigate the abuse. Now, I would like to stop here and make a point that these first disclosures, because what you're going to hear is allegations that these memories were implanted, okay? But what you see here is the first disclosures of abuse were only implicating the babysitter as well as a couple other people, all right? The allegations of abuse against Dick and Brenda Miles would not come at a counseling session, and that is a key point to take note of, okay? When these allegations of false memory syndrome and implanted memories come into play, they are completely debunked by the facts of the case. All right, continuing on, shortly after Jane Doe 1 identified to Mother 1 that Doe 1 male defendant and Doe 2 female defendant sexually assaulted the children at so-called touching parties. Okay, so that disclosure was done to the mother directly, absent of any therapist. Roughly a week after Doe 1 male defendant and Doe 2 female defendant were identified for their part in these crimes against the children of plaintiff group 1 and their mother arrived at sacrament meeting on Sunday to find an apostle who had not ever visited their ward until that time, sitting with his daughter, Brenda Miles, defendant, and her children in the congregation. Interesting. 18. Shortly after the visit...
Got that, right? You got that?
Which one would it be?
Russell M. Nelson.
Oh.
So once this stuff starts coming to the surface, Russell M. Nelson comes to their ward and sits with their daughter to make a statement. In other words...
Like we're watching you kind of thing, or...
You can take what you want from it, but it was meant to silence this. My opinion.
Is it? Yeah, generally speaking, when an apostle visits any ward, he will sit on the stand. So to have this apostle, which is a parent of one of the members of the congregation, sit with that member of the congregation, it would attract a lot of attention, and it would be an obvious sign to anyone present where his allegiance was. Continuing on, shortly after the visit by the apostle in late January or early February 1986, Jane Doe 1 identified perpetrator, her own father, as participating with the Mileses in committing these heinous crimes against children. So as you can see, these disclosures are coming out piecemeal, right? And that's the way it usually works when you're dealing with child abuse. When they feel comfortable sharing, they will disclose. And so it's interesting the order of disclosure and how that has taken place. The father was the last to be disclosed. After these disclosures, Mother 1 decided to take her children to Hawaii to visit their grandparents. In March of 1986, perpetrator at Bill Kirstensen began psychiatric evaluation and treatment at Johns Hopkins in Maryland. He was discharged in June 1986 with the principal diagnosis of pedophilia. Again, key element right there. Remember that. Subsequently, the children of Plaintiff Group 1 and their mother were approached by Neil A. Maxwell, another apostle of the church, who gave each of the children and their mother a priesthood blessing in an attempt to help them heal from the horrors of the sexual abuse and crimes committed against them. In these blessings, Maxwell discussed how the perpetrators of the sexual crimes made horrible choices and that God would be the judge of the perpetrators. Maxwell further blessed each of them for comfort and instructed them to forgive and forget.
And again, he's not implicated directly, but he is part of the alleged cover-up.
Correct. So again, evidence here suggests that he believed these children. He was a friend of the grandparents. The grandparents were instrumental in bringing him into the situation, and they explained to him exactly what was going on. He believed them, but, and I'm sure Justin will cover this, nothing was done.
Did he live in Bountiful also? Was he part of this community, or?
I don't know. I don't think he was part of the community, but he was friends with Marion Burroughs and Nicholas Grosbeck Smith, the grandparents.
Elder Maxwell shows up quite often in abuse cases inside of the church as well. Tyler, I don't know if we want to take any time to talk about it, but he has a Hamblin case tie-in as well. He recommended or counseled the wife of David Hamblin to marry him, and that's been recorded. And so Elder Maxwell appears to have been sort of the go-to guy, one of the go-to guys inside of the church hierarchy whenever these types of situations would crop up. You'll find his name in many, many abuse cases.
Yeah, as someone who has dug deep into the Hamlin case, that was a very curious connection there when we heard a disclosure from Roselle Hamlin Stevenson, the parent, the mother of the Hamlin daughters, when she disclosed to them in a secretly recorded tape that the Provo police have disclosed that Neil A. Maxwell was the one who sealed her and David Hamblin in 1976.
So in all your study, you think that this is the best explanation?
Oh, the only
the study of
explanation
the
I can
ritual
think
stuff?
of, no, is some kind of programming that I may have had as a small child, or when I met David, or when David was small. I mean, I can't explain why I felt like I had a witness that I was supposed to marry him, and then I had such horrible cold feet right before I was going to marry him that I went and talked it over with the man who was going to marry us, with Neil Maxwell.
You talked it over with Neil Maxwell?
Yeah, he performed our ceremony. He gave me a blessing in his office. I had
You
cold
never told
feet.
me that.
I had horrible cold feet.
You just said that you told her, and she said something like, it's too late. You talked this over with Neil Maxwell?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Wasn't one of the 12 involved in the Bassett case as well? We have at some point need to do a show on the Bassett case because there's a lot of similar cover-up things there too.
Yep.
All right. Oh, forgive and forget. We hear that over and over again. But never let's hold people accountable, which is key to the repentance process as well.
Well, and it's key to stopping child abuse.
Exactly. So going on, the children of Plaintiff Group 1 continued to receive psychiatric treatment for much of their adolescence. Their psychiatrist was Dr. Paul L. Whitehead, a board-certified specialist and in child and adolescent psychiatry. Dr. Whitehead began treating Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, Jane Doe 5, and John Doe 1 a few months after the abuse ended and continued to treat them until they were 18, 16, 13, and 18 respectively. Included herein as Exhibit 5 is a redacted version of Dr. Whitehead's declaration, and I'd like to read that just so you can have that evidence. Okay, this should be on the screen. I, Paul L. Whitehead, M.D., do declare under criminal penalty under the law of the state of Utah that the following is true and correct. Skipping to 2, I am a medical doctor specializing in psychiatry and neurology psychiatry. I've been practicing since 1967. I treated the children of Mother 1 for trauma. Each of them suffered from being sexually abused and assaulted in a group setting by numerous adults, including perpetrator, which is Bill Carson's and their father, D1 defendant, Dick Miles, and D2 defendant, Brenda Miles. I started treating Jane Doe 1 on a regular basis a few months after the horrific sexual abuse ended. Jane Doe 1 was 8 years old when her treatment started. Treatment continued until she was approximately 18 years old. Like Jane Doe 1, I treated Jane Doe 5 a few months after the sexual abuse ended. Jane Doe 5 was 6 years old when the treatment began. And so on and so on. You can read all that, but he basically details exactly what he did. And the final, on the next page there is, all of the children were badly damaged as a result of the horrific sexual abuse. Each required prolonged and extensive treatment. All right.
Now, I'm sure you'll get into this, but you said the father, Bill Carson, committed suicide in the 90s.
Correct.
Did any of the kids, you would think living with that might be a natural path, or are they all still alive?
Just the babysitter is the only other one that we know of who has committed suicide. But as someone who has spoken to survivors outside of this particular case who were also allegedly involved in this ring, there is a host of other people who have died either because of substance abuse or through suicide. So even though we only have knowledge of 2 suicides, that does not even begin to, cover the scope of this situation.
Yeah, also, I can't help wonder if those suicides were convenient to keep people quiet or keep this under. I mean, because this story should have been national news. Yeah, I mean, this is especially the people in the state of Utah, and the fact that no one knows this stuff blows my mind. And there's a reason no one knows it, because they don't want you to know it.
Well, and a lot of times we see with ritual abuse, there's almost like a kill switch embedded if things get too close to light.
So I didn't put much in this presentation about this, but since you brought it up, I mean, there's very much a reason that this wasn't heard. When I go through my presentation, what you're going to learn is that there was another man involved in this who hand-delivered abuse cover-up instructions to Russell M. Nelson in around April of 1986, who eventually had a crisis of conscience and tried to take this story nationally. And I have in my possession pictures of the press passes that this man had from the New York Times and the Washington Post and Vice News, all of whom wanted to cover the story. But from my conversations with this man, I was told that after at first accepting the story, eventually these news organizations called him back and said that the church had interfered and that they had been told that they were not to cover this story under any circumstances. So when we say that there's a reason that these stories don't make it out into national news, it's because the church has the power and influence and ability to squash a story like this when they need to. And I can go a little bit more into that later on, but because there's
$100 billion, you have the ability. That comes with a lot of power. Comes with that.
Sure.
All right, and I apologize again. This is just going really long, and so in the interest of time, we're going to have these documents up. Then I wanted to read the Declaration of Mother 1, but it just basically, she covers a lot of the same thing, but she has her own perspective on the situation, and I'll just read the last paragraph, where she speaks about Elder Maxwell coming over, giving blessings, and saying that Jane Doe 1 could be rebaptized. She says, Apostle Maxwell agreed to allowing her to be rebaptized. Elder Maxwell knew of the allegations made against Dick and Brenda Miles and Bill Carsonson, yet the church refused to ever take any disciplinary action against them, and that is any of them.
And there was no reason to think the mother was involved with this. She was never named, it sounds like.
No, but again, when you look at enough of these cases, you see that oftentimes victims are unable to see because of their own abuse experience when they were children. They just are not able to see things. And so it would not surprise me. And when you hear all of the other abuse that took place in the mother's family, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, later, but Bill Carsonson, so the mother is the second oldest child in her family. Okay, she has 5 younger siblings. 3 of those younger 5 siblings were also allegedly abused by Bill Carsonson when he was pre-mission, so younger, as a older teen, as well as after his mission, prior to him marrying this daughter number 2.
So he allegedly molested his...
No, so in this case, we can drop the allegedly because 2 of these daughters sued Bill Carsonson and won a default judgment against him for $5 million. So this is not alleged abuse. There was a default judgment filed against him because 2 of those daughters ended up filing a lawsuit against him.
And I think you already hit this, Tyler, but I think hopefully the audience caught that. And this guy who is convicted was not disciplined by the church, correct?
Well, convicted is not a good term. It was a default judgment. So
okay, default judgment. The brethren know he's involved. Maxwell knows he's involved. Nelson knows he's involved, and yet no discipline from the church. Am I correct?
Oh, it's worse than that. Just wait until you hear what happens next. So let's pile even more dirt onto Bill Carsonson's situation here by going over the report from the psychiatrist Fred Berlin, MD, from Johns Hopkins Hospital. So this is his opinion, his professional opinion, and you have this on the screen as well. 33-year-old was attorney from Utah who was implicated in several incidents of sexual abuse of young children, his son, daughters, and nieces. Patient did not deny these incidents might have occurred, but did say he was unable to remember them. Through treatment, he became more effective in ... and it kind of cuts off there. Next page. Same thing. The patient discussed the content of the sodium with the nurse. He admits to remembering many inappropriate sexual acts that he was involved in with his children and mother. He denies, however, being sexually aroused by his children, but does state that he had an erection during the time of the instances. He also denies ever climaxing when demonstrating sexual acts on his children. He explains the incidents by stating that he has a great need to be in control, and he connects control with sexual control. He states that not climaxing is a form of maximal control. He states also that the sexual control over his children, he states also that he showed control over his sexual life with his wife by not complying to having sex when she wanted it, but doing it only when he wanted it, and initiated the act when asked why. And that bit of control enough. It's never easy to read doctor's handwriting. Sorry. I apologize. He states that he wanted to have that same type of control over his children, like his mother has over him. He also admits that the tabooness of it was a real turn-on, just being able to get away with cheating on my wife. He also states that doing this with his children.
Did he get admitted there voluntarily, or was it a court order of some sort?
No, he went voluntarily. Yeah. Again, it's a deep story, and I encourage everyone to dig into this. We just do not have time to cover all the details, but yeah. Initially, he was very open to the idea that this could have happened, but there was a point at which everything seemed to change, and that was the point at which it is my belief that the cover-up was really initiated, and he was also told not to
Reversed
talk.
all his statement.
Exactly.
Once the cover-up started.
Exactly. All right. So, next we have the declarations of Jane Doe 3 and Jane Doe 4, and again, these are long and involved, and we will leave them up for you, the audience, to get into, but I really want to hear Justin, so we're going to skip over these. But the important element of this is Jane Doe 3 and Jane Doe 4 are the innocent children of Mother 2 who married Bill Carstensen after all of this. After all of this has come out, Bill Carstensen remarries a woman with 2 young children, and that is Jane Doe 3 and Jane Doe 4. And of course, you know what happens next. They were sexually abused for years. Bill Carstensen and Mother 2 would go on to have 2 biological sons of their own who were also allegedly abused, and the cycle continued.
Justin, are you going to get into how the mother, his second wife, worked for the church?
Yes. Yeah, I'm actually glad, Tyler spent a lot of time on Family 1. I actually spend a lot of time on Family 2 because I think it's critical. And one thing I just want to just throw out here and get confirmation of, is that this second family never saw Barbara Snow or Dr. Whitehead, correct, Tyler? Am I correct in that?
You are correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I want everybody just to stop for 1 second, and I just want you to hold on to that. Because when we learn about how the church responded to this is going to be important. But this second family never saw Barbara Snow or Dr. Whitehead, but were also abused by Bill Carstensen.
Great point. And again, in the interest of time and attention span, I know this is going long and I apologize, but we have Declaration of Mother 2, and it is even more heartbreaking than the others. And I will just say that here she says, I married perpetrator Bill Carstensen in June of 1988. That is a full 2 years after all of this was coming to light. She had 2 daughters from a previous marriage and 2 biological sons. Shortly before her marriage to perpetrator, she received a call from Mother 1, perpetrator's former spouse, with whom she had 4 biological children. Mother 1 called to warn me that Bill Carstensen was a pedophile, and that Bill Carstensen and other adult members of his ward, including the Mileses, had molested Mother 1's 4 children and other children in the ward. I was angry and didn't believe Mother 1. Bill Carstensen, her husband at the time, was an active member of the LDS Church, a member in good standing. I told her that if Bill Carstensen was a pedophile, he would have been excommunicated from the church. If the church, and I'll finish with this, her statement, if the church would have excommunicated Bill Carstensen, I would have been warned what Mother 1 was telling me was true, and I never would have married him.
Wow.
Especially when you find out what happened to those poor kids.
So thank you for sticking with me and all that. I will now turn the time over to Justin to take the ball from here. And sadly, it doesn't get any easier with what Justin has to share.
Can I ask a qualifying question before we hand it over to Justin? We understand there's a ritualistic abuse happening here. Do we have any reason to believe there might be ties to the CS or something more? Not that this isn't as nefarious as it can get, but anything with sacrifices or...
No. And again, I hate to make that qualifier because all sexual abuse, child sexual abuse especially, is satanic, and it's and organized, right? This is organized. So I prefer to stick to the term organized abuse with this particular case. No, the only incident that happened was that a cat was killed as a threat to the children. But there were, and again, there's many similarities, like videotaping and the drinking of urine and feces. So there's a lot that rhymes with other cases, and
having sex with your
incest.
Yes,
with your kids, with your parents
Siblings.
and grand. Yeah, that's all
the trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with these kids, in what was documented here, it was not ritualistic.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start the conversation from my side, because what we're going to see is that the church kind of wants us to believe that this is about ritual abuse, when in reality it's not. And I'm going to prove that with some documents. But it's very interesting that the church tries to frame this as another case of satanic panic and ritual abuse, and saying, no, that's not what this is, and so we need to get rid of this case. So I think it's a great question and a great place to start the conversation. So before I get started, I really quickly just want to talk a little bit about myself, so that people have a sense of where I'm coming from. Because I've titled my presentation today, Truth and Trust of Pedophiles and Prophets, right? And so, but part of this is trying to discern what the truth is and whom we can trust as we discuss difficult topics like the one that we're discussing today. So I don't want anybody to have to go research who I am and come back later. So really quickly, my name is Justin Riggs. I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 45 years. About two and a half years ago, I began studying abuse in the church. And because of my research and my interaction with church leadership, I was eventually excommunicated from the church. So I just want to be really upfront and very clear about the fact that I was excommunicated for apostasy due to my research and pressing on some of these cases that we found, amongst other things that I've found that are related to the context of how this could happen. Really, my research is about putting things in historical perspective with primary source documents. And so what I have here today is a chronology. And what I want to talk about is claims that Russell M. Nelson has made, claims that the church make, and trying to identify whether there are patterns in the life of Russell M. Nelson and other leaders of the church that would lead us to believe that perhaps there's truth behind the claims made in the Brenda and Dick Miles case that was filed in 2018. So with that being said, we're going to have to go pretty fast, and so I'm just going to hop right into it. I want to start with a video of Russell M. Nelson. This is at a conference in California, if I remember correctly, and he makes a really important claim here. And so it's a YouTube video. I'm just going to turn it on. Here we go.
Toward our heavenly home, I plead with you to stay focused on what you know to be true. Increase what you know by studying from sources you can trust. Seek for answers to your questions through prayer, searching the scriptures, and studying the words of prophets, seers, and revelators. There are 15 on the earth today. You can trust them completely.
Okay, so I want to start with that President Nelson himself has invited us to ask questions and to seek answers from sources that we can trust, one of which he claims is the 15 men who run the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's from the mouth of the prophet himself. And the question becomes, can we trust them completely? Okay, and there are scriptural reasons to believe that perhaps we shouldn't trust 15 men completely that I'm not going to go into today. People can research the Joseph Smith translation of the book of Mark if they want to find answers for themselves regarding that. What I'm going to look at is historical sources from the lives of these men, because one of the things that I often say that I've learned in my research is that anyone can say anything, but actions reveal intent. So we all know that the brethren speak beautiful words that make us feel good inside from time to time, that teach us things that are valuable to our lives and lead us to make good decisions. But unfortunately, sometimes when we look at the actions of these men, they don't align with the words that they say during general conference or when they visit our stake or so on and so forth. The second piece of this is simply, I want to start with the definition of truth that the church lays out for us. So in Doctrine and Covenants, truth is defined as knowledge of things as they are, and as they were, and as they are to come. So the goal of my presentation today is to help us understand what the truth is regarding the claims that were made in this case that Tyler just did such a great job of going through and reading us those declarations under the penalty of perjury that these victims and other professionals made regarding the claims. Because, of course, the whole purpose of filing a lawsuit is to understand what the truth was about that, to discern whether or not there needed reparations to be made because people were victimized potentially. So we're going to use the church's definition of truth, and we're going to try to stay away from opinions and that kind of thing, and we're going to look at historical documents to see what the truth is regarding this. So to start off, we've talked a lot about Bill Carstensen, and he was born August 25th, 1952. What we didn't talk about yet is that Bill Carstensen's abuse did not start in Bountiful. So the victims who filed this lawsuit were not Bill's first victims. And interestingly, there's a book called Paper Dolls by a woman who goes by the name of April Daniels, and the grandmother of some of the victims in the Miles case, Marion Smith. And they write in Paper Dolls about the fact that Bill Carstensen was abusing children in the Mount Olympus area at Skyline High School, along with two other people, Brian David Mitchell and David Fuller. Interestingly, Brian David Mitchell is the man who ended up kidnapping Elizabeth Smart, and David Fuller is a man who murdered a little girl named Casey Woody. So this group of young men, and then there are other people we believe who are involved in the Mount Olympus abuse case, but they were abusing as early as the 60s, the late 60s and early 70s. And we have reason to believe that church leadership knew about this abuse that was taking place and that nothing was done to Bill Carstensen ecclesiastically or criminally when his abuse started in the late 60s or mid to late 60s and early 70s. But I just want to point out that this case, the Miles case, potentially could have been circumvented altogether if, when Bill Carstensen started abusing as a teenager, if the church had taken care of that abuse then, there may not have been a Miles case to begin with, because Bill Carstensen might have been in jail where he probably belonged.
That makes me think of the Jensen case as well.
Yeah, Tom Stallings, yeah.
Yeah. So, we did discuss about how Bill Carstensen abused the Smith daughters. This is just a screenshot from the court showing that there was a default judgment against Bill Carstensen in the case that these Smith daughters brought up. And Tyler, I know Tyler didn't use any names, and I appreciate that. We live at a time where these names are readily available. If anybody goes and uses ChatGPT and starts searching about Bill Carstensen or the Miles case, ChatGPT is going to tell you the names of these people. So I am going to use some names. I know that this is sort of a sticky wicket in the abuse survivor community. But the fact is, anybody can find out who Bill Carstensen married. Anybody can find out who the children were. And so I am going to be using some names. I hope that's okay with everybody. We talked about how Bill Carstensen married Sharon Gay Smith. And, one of the things we didn't talk about all that much is this Smith family and who they were. They were very much Mormon royalty in a sense. Nicholas Grosbeck Smith was the father, and Marion Smith was the mother of Sharon Gay Smith. And Nicholas Grosbeck Smith is one of the children from a polygamous relationship of one of the prophets of the church. And so this was a family that was very well established. In addition to that, one of the things that we're not going to talk a lot about today, but that I do want to bring up, is that what we find in this particular case is that there are a lot of men who are parts of secret societies based out of Utah involved in this case, including Nicholas Grosbeck Smith, who was a member of the University of Utah Skull and Bones chapter. We're not going to go into this very much. I have an entire presentation that lays out the case about these secret societies and the membership. But Nicholas Grosbeck Smith, Russell M. Nelson, and the lawyer for Brenda and Dick Miles were all members of Skull and Bones there in Utah, which is very much Utah royalty as well, right? It appears to me, based on my research, that at the University of Utah, these secret societies, starting with fraternities like Sigma Chi, would then feed into more elite secret societies like Skull and Bones, and then that these men in Skull and Bones, just like the Yale chapter, would be placed in positions of power and influence in government, business, and in this case, inside the ecclesiastical structure of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And we've talked about Skull and Bones before, Justin. That's there, as I understand it, there's only 2 chapters. There's the one in Utah and then the one that's at Yale, where a lot of our political leaders come from.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, especially ones that claim to have come from Yale. There's a big argument. Like, people want to argue with me all the time about whether or not the chapter at the University of Utah is affiliated with the chapter at Yale. And all I can say about that is that the Utonian, which is the University of Utah's yearbook, is very clear multiple times throughout the years. The Skull and Bones chapter at the University of Utah lays claim to coming from the chapter at Yale. And so people can argue about that all that they want to, but as far as I'm concerned, the historical record is extremely clear that the chapter at the University of Utah is a direct descendant from the chapter at Yale, in my opinion.
And if our audience, if you'd like to, have Justin back on to dig into this, he does a phenomenal job. Let us know in the comments, and we're happy to bring him back on, because he has done a phenomenal job researching this stuff, better than anyone I know. There's been a few people who have researched it and done a okay job, but not what he's done. So if you would like that, let us know in the comments.
And if I can interject really quick with something, Justin, I don't have a confirmation that Nicholas Grosbeck Smith was Scully Bones. I have confirmation that his brother Jerry Smith was Skull and Bones. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you for correcting me there. I think you're correct about that.
But it's in the family, which is important.
Yeah. Okay, and I think the point here is, if Russell M. Nelson is going to get up and claim that there are 15 men on the face of the earth that we can trust completely, including himself, one of the difficult questions we need to ask ourselves is, should we trust men who made secret oaths with fraternal organizations and secret societies like Sigma Chi and Skull and Bones? And everybody has to make that decision for themselves, but I think it's a relevant question that we need to address, especially as we see the patterns unfold in their lives through their actions.
Briefly allude to some of the secret oaths that are made, because I think a lot of our audience probably doesn't even know what Skull and Bones is. I'm actually surprised how few people know. I would expect more people to be aware of Skull and Bones, but it's surprising how...
It's a secret society for a reason.
Yeah, but I think it's important, and you do a good job laying it out, like the Black Sacrament and some things like that. Would you just kind of give a couple high-level things of what they do in there and why we should be concerned about people who are part of this
sure,
literally secret society? I mean, come on, Utah, secret combinations.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the Black Sacrament actually comes from Sigma Chi. We don't know much about, especially about the University of Utah Skull and Bones initiation rites or anything along those lines. But what we do know is that these fraternal organizations are centered around secrecy and making what are called death oaths. They call them that in their own paperwork. We know this because the Sigma Chi initiation ritual was leaked by WikiLeaks. And so we have access to that document and are able to go through the entire thing. And so what people have to recognize is that when somebody like Russell M. Nelson joined a fraternity like Sigma Chi, he was required to go through the initiation rites just like everybody else, which include veneration of the man that they call their patron saint, which is Constantine, right? Which, for those who don't know historically, Constantine was really responsible for marrying church and state together to consolidate power, right? And really, in many ways, would be considered sort of the figurehead of the great apostasy, what we used to call the great apostasy in the church. Now the church doesn't really want to talk about the great apostasy, and you even have scholars saying that there was no such thing as the great apostasy. But inside of a fraternity like Sigma Chi, they call Constantine their patron saint, and they do a little play. They do some cosplay where somebody dresses up as Constantine and he gives them a lecture. And then they do this thing called the Black Sacrament, which very much mirrors what LDS people would recognize as the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, except that everybody is dressed in black robes and, and partaking in that rite and ritual in that context. I think, the biggest problem for me is simply that, like, from my understanding of doctrine and reading the scriptures, the Lord has commanded us not to serve two masters, nor to make oaths like the ones that many, many church leaders did. So Russell M. Nelson is the prime example, but Elder Ballard was a member of Sigma Chi as well. And I have an entire list of the Sigma Chi roster because I bought a book online that they produced. And many church leaders went through this system where they were making death oaths. And then if you were a good fraternity brother, or if you were part of a family or or an individual who showed a lot of promise, then you would get passed on into sort of like what I would consider fraternity graduate school, which is like Skull and Bones and Owl and Key. So Skull and Bones is the secret society that the juniors at the University of Utah would join, and then Owl and Key is the seniors. They call them honor societies. But again, if you look at the historical documents, you can see a couple things. One, they call themselves secret societies. They're very clear about the fact that they're a secret society when they're formed. Second of all, you can see the abuse that's associated with fraternities and secret societies at the University of Utah. There are many news stories about initiates being abused to the point where it appears that there may have been what I would call an interregnum at the University of Utah inside the Skull and Bones chapter, which just happens to overlap with when Russell M. Nelson became a member. One of the really critical questions about Russell M. Nelson's membership in Skull and Bones is what was going on in that chapter while Russell M. Nelson was a member there. And unfortunately, he's not answering any questions. And so we're left to just look at the historical record. And what we see is that there was much abuse going on before Russell M. Nelson was a member there. And then what we see after his time there is articles in the University of Utah newspapers where they interview members of Skull and Bones. And these guys show up to the interview in death masks and black robes. And it's literally in the paper. The picture is these Skull and Bones members in death masks and black robes. So we have really good historical evidence of the type of organization that Skull and Bones was before Russell M. Nelson was there, and really good evidence about what kind of organization it was after he was there. But there's sort of this black box of the time that when he was there as a member, but nobody's talking and willing to answer questions about what type of organization it was when he joined, right? But overall, Skull and Bones is meant to identify people that you're going to place into positions of power and influence inside of business, right, ecclesiastical structures, government, so on and so forth. And then they've made oaths with each other to support each other inside of the goals that they have for themselves and for society. So I don't want to take too much time on this, but is that a fair enough summary, Jason?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
All right, great. So Mother 2 that we referenced is her name was Marilyn Brady, and then eventually Marilyn Brady Karstensen, and then after that Marilyn Brady Karstensen Hoyman, and then I believe there was even one more marriage after that. But Marilyn Brady, one thing that's important to understand about Marilyn Brady is that while Bill Karstensen was abusing the Smith children allegedly with Dick and Brenda Miles, Marilyn Brady was actually working inside of the church in the membership department. So she had a really good handle on the church's policies and procedures, which becomes an important part of this story. So I'm just going to read really quickly. She says, from about 1984 to 1990, I worked in the church membership department at the church office building and was very familiar with the handbooks and policies and procedures of the church. The only conclusion I could draw when I learned about Bill Karstensen's alleged involvement in this child sex ring was that the allegations were all lies because he was not excommunicated, nor was he criminally prosecuted. I knew how the church procedures worked with regard to allegations of this sort. Hold a church court and excommunicate the perpetrator if the accusations are determined to be credible.
And that's the argument you hear a lot from people, like when we bring things to light, and they're like, well, it can't be true because we haven't seen any repercussions from it. So it's a valid argument.
It's a great point. And I mean, anybody who's been a member of the church knows how much trust we put in the church and how much we base our lives on the evidence of what we see around us in our ward. And if a member hasn't been disfellowshipped or excommunicated, if these types of things haven't been addressed, I think it's easy to be hard on Marilyn Brady for marrying Bill Karstensen. But in reality, like, all she had was one woman coming to her, which was the ex-spouse of the man she was going to marry, telling her that there was abuse going on. But when she looked at the institution that she trusted, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what she saw was that no action had been taken, right? And so her behavior is not all that irrational when you really stop to think about it and look at what she did.
Actually, when you look at our politicians, the Mitt Romneys, the Coxes, the corruption, you know what I mean, in that fills our federal and state reps, it is very clear to me that we, the people of this state, have been programmed to blindly trust authority. A white suit and a tie. I mean, it is couldn't be more clear to me.
Sure. So I call it cultural conditioning, right? And we all go through it in whatever cultures we grow up in, we are culturally conditioned. And in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the cultural conditioning, what's the strongest cultural conditioning that we receive as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? It's follow the prophet, right? Troy Abels, a friend of Tim Ballard, put out a YouTube video this week about how prophets, the words of the living prophets are greater than the scriptures, right? And this is hammered into us from the moment we're born to the moment that we die, that if we're obedient to the prophets and if we follow the prophet, everything will be okay and work out for us. It's incredibly strong conditioning. And then, of course, that flows down to decisions like whether or not to hold disciplinary councils in cases of abuse, because everybody just assumes that if a bishop or a stake president doesn't pursue charges, that they're doing that under inspiration, right? And usually with at least guidance from like the church's abuse helpline, right? That kind of a thing. So yeah, it's incredibly strong conditioning. And that's why it's so important to look at the historical record, because the only way to evaluate whether that conditioning is good or bad is to look at who it is that we're trusting and who it is that we're following, okay? So we all know that Russell M. Nelson was called as an LDS apostle in 1984. What Russell Nelson did not recognize or realize at this point was that within a couple years, his life was going to get turned upside down a little bit by these allegations of abuse against his daughter, Brenda Miles. So we've covered pretty in depth about how Sharon Smith, Mother One, learned about the alleged abuse of her children by Dick and Brenda Miles, so I'm not going to read that or go through that. And we talked about how Russell M. Nelson then made a surprise visit to Dick and Brenda Miles' Bountiful ward, right? And so I'm going to read this. I think we may have read this already once, but let's just read it one more time. And the important thing to recognize is that Elder Nelson is a new junior apostle, a year and a half, maybe 2 years into his service as an apostle when this happens. And this is the choice that he makes when he learns about the allegations of abuse against his daughter and son-in-law. Within a week or two of Dick and Brenda Miles being identified as perpetrators of these crimes and the police starting an investigation, we went to church and the apostle, meaning Russell M. Nelson himself, was there along with his wife, sitting with Brenda Miles, his daughter, and her children in sacrament meeting. Instead of sitting on the stand, Russell M. Nelson was sitting in the pews with the normal members. I recall the bishop standing up and acknowledging Russell M. Nelson sitting with his family in the congregation. Okay? So one really interesting thing about this is that theoretically we could confirm this by finding the bishop, right, and asking him if he remembers when Russell M. Nelson visited the ward. But what I found in my research is that anybody associated with this case at all in any way, shape, or form is not going to talk. So one of the things that I don't want to say that we know, but I have been made aware that there is a letter from Russell M. Nelson to the leadership of the Warden Stake that Dick and Brenda Miles and Bill Karstensen were a part of, invoking his apostolic authority and telling the local leadership not to pursue the case. Now, I don't have a copy of that document, but I have two independent witnesses who have told me that that document exists. And I've tried to track that down through multiple avenues, but nobody associated with this case is willing to talk about it or to share the documents that are available. And that would include police, ecclesiastical leaders, members of the community, and so on and so forth, okay? But what we do know is that according to the testimony of Mother One, Russell Nelson did make a visit, so we know that he was there in the vicinity, and it's unlikely that he didn't talk to the leadership of the Warden Stake while he was there. More importantly than that in my world is the testimony of David Eccles Hardy, who was the brother of a man by the name of Ralph W. Hardy Jr., who sat on a committee inside of the church called the Special Affairs Committee. And again, I have an entire presentation about the Special Affairs Committee that's like 2 hours long to help people understand what's going inside of the church. But just to give you a really quick recap of what the Special Affairs Committee is basically a bunch of very powerful, very influential men and women like Beverly Campbell and Brother Hardy, and so on and so forth, that deal with issues that would be considered like less ecclesiastical in nature and more civil in nature, right? And so in a situation like this, where allegations of abuse can come up, the Special Affairs Committee, which doesn't keep notes of its meetings and doesn't have an agenda, according to the testimony of Beverly Campbell, who wrote it in her memoirs, will take these kinds of things and try to address them for the church. Now, Ralph W. Hardy Jr. was a very prominent Washington, D.C. lawyer, and David Eccles Hardy, his brother, was a lawyer in Salt Lake City. And so David Eccles Hardy, in the Miles case, swore out a statement where he states the following. So we're starting on number 4. So just really quickly, what he says in 1, 2, and 3 is basically that a lawyer that he knew really well, which we now know was his brother, Ralph Hardy Jr., reached out to him and asked if he would be willing to help out with a situation involving one of the apostles. And so this is after David Hardy had learned about the allegations against Dick Miles, who had built David Hardy's house, okay? So Dick Miles was a home builder, and he had built David Hardy's house. And so David knew him, and he had heard rumors about this pedophilia ring. He says, about 2 to 3 days later, after learning about the allegations against Dick and Brenda Miles, I received a call from an attorney in Washington, D.C. That would be Ralph W. Hardy Jr., with whom I was very familiar. He's very familiar because it's his brother. He asked me if I could do him a favor relating to a very sensitive subject involving one of the apostles. I obliged. The attorney asked if I would receive a letter via fax and hand deliver it to Apostle Russell M. Nelson at the church office building, that Elder Nelson would be waiting for it. When the fax came through, I read it, curious of the contents. I recall the opening paragraph saying, "Dear Elder Nelson, I am so sorry that this tragedy has befallen your family. This needs to be kept out of the public eye." I remember having my interest piqued because of the allegations I heard days earlier about Dick Miles. Okay? So it's not just that Russell M. Nelson is visiting the ward to show support for his daughter and send a statement to the members of the ward and the leadership of the ward and so on and so forth. We have sworn testimony, again, with the penalty of perjury, that the church itself was, through the Special Affairs Committee and Ralph W. Hardy Jr., was actively involved in making sure that these allegations did not come to light in 1986. And they were very successful at this, okay? It's important to point out that that document, again, does not exist as far as I know. David Hardy did not keep a copy of that document, so it is just his word. And I want to be clear about that we don't have the actual document as far as I know, okay? We talked about how Bill Carstensen was diagnosed as a pedophile at Johns Hopkins, so I'm not going to go into that very much. And then we know that Bill Carstensen and Sharon Gay Smith got a divorce. Now, here's where I want to slow down a little bit and talk a little bit about this second group of plaintiffs that were in the Miles case, okay? So Marilyn Brady, the church employee, was warned by Sharon Smith about Bill Carstensen's pedophilia. She states, "Shortly before my marriage to Bill Carstensen, I received a call from Mother One, being Sharon Smith or Sharon Carstensen, Bill's former spouse, with whom he had 4 biological children. Sharon called to warn me that Bill was a pedophile, that Bill and other adult members of his ward, including Dick and Brenda Miles, had molested Sharon's 4 children and other children in their ward." Now, the number of children, just to throw this out there, that Marion Smith and April Daniels state that Bill Carstensen, that they're aware of, abused, is over 25. The number that they say is 26. And that's written. That's in the in a blip here and a blip there that Marion Smith wrote. Okay, so when it says other children, it's not 1 or 2 other children. We're aware of somewhere around 25 children that we're aware of. Marilyn says, "I was angry and didn't believe Sharon that because Bill was an active member of the LDS Church, a member in good standing. I told her that if Bill was a pedophile, he would have been excommunicated from the church," which we've already discussed. Now, there's another little wrinkle in here that I want to point out about this, though. She goes on to say, "If the church would have excommunicated Bill, I would have been warned that what Sharon was telling me was true, and I never would have married him," which is why she's in the case to begin with. because the case here is that they're trying to make is that the damage done to these children by Bill Carstensen was because the church failed to act. Theoretically, like the theory of the lawyer of the plaintiffs, was that the reason that Bill and Dick and Brenda Miles weren't punished was because Russell M. Nelson put his thumb on the scales of justice, both inside the church and in the criminal investigation, okay? She says this: shortly after I questioned Bill about these horrific allegations against him, he denied it ever happened. He explained that Heavenly Father knew it never happened because he was promised by an apostle, either Russell M. Nelson or Elder Maxwell, I can't remember which because both were involved as explained in the paragraph below, that the heavens were closed as it related to allegations of sexual abuse of his children. He told me the church dismissed the accusations as false, and that was evidenced by the fact that no church court was ever held. So we talked earlier about the blessings that the children received, the Smith children received from Elder Maxwell. But Marilyn Brady testifies that either Russell M. Nelson or Neil A. Maxwell also gave a blessing to Bill Carstensen in which they told him that the heavens were sealed against these allegations, which gave Bill all the confidence that he needed to go out and get remarried and continue to abuse children, okay?
So I have a question about Carstensen, and I know we didn't say convicted, but there was a default judgment previously that we could take moving forward the alleged out because we know that he's a known perpetrator. This is prior to this, correct?
No, so that's a really good point, and we need to be fair to everybody involved here in terms of the chronology, right? Let's see, I have it down here. The lawsuit, the Smith versus Carstensen personal injury lawsuit, was not filed until 1992. So in '86, Elder Maxwell and Elder Nelson, there was no lawsuit to know about, right? But there was the abuse of the Smith children, right? Does that make sense?
And Carstensen was happily, or rather unhappily, married to Marilyn Brady at this time. For another 3 years, she wouldn't divorce him until 1995, or sex separate, his second wife. So again, she is naive, blissfully ignorant of what is going on behind the scenes because nothing is made public.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I want to be fair to Marilyn, like to say that she was blissfully ignorant, I think what we're going to see here in some of the testimony is that she may have been, I think she was just trusting. She was overly trusting of the church and its leadership. But she did follow up on these allegations, and something wasn't sitting right, because here's what she says. In about 1989, I learned that Sharon had obtained a ceiling cancellation from Bill. I was working in the membership department at the time and knew that the policy in situations like this was for the church to contact the other party, in this case, Bill, and his bishop to obtain their position on the matter and to determine if there was cause for a temple ceiling cancellation. Here, neither Bill nor our bishop were contacted prior to the cancellation. This requirement to contact the other party is only waived if that person was excommunicated. So there's this sort of weird coincidence of history that Marilyn Brady, who trusts the church, she trusts them, but not only does she trust them, she knows these policies and procedures inside and out because she works for the church. And so she starts asking questions about how Sharon Smith was able to obtain a ceiling cancellation when Bill Carstensen nor his bishop were contacted as they should have been, and as happens in all other cases of ceiling cancellations. This is another example. You know, we talked about how one of the children was able to be rebaptized, right? But what it appears is that the church is willing to quietly acknowledge that there's a problem here, and they're willing to redo ordinances or cancel ordinances quietly, but that they're not going to do it following proper policy and procedure, because if they do, it will draw attention to the fact that they're acknowledging that abuse took place.
So they're bypassing the processes and protocols that are set forth for every other temple-worthy member.
That's right. And this gets Marilyn really kind of wondering what's going on here, okay? So she starts asking questions, and because she works for the church, she starts asking questions of some pretty powerful people. So for example, she knew F. Michael Watson, who was the secretary to the first presidency. And she goes to F. Michael Watson, and here's what she says. I knew the secretaries to the First Presidency, LH and MW. I spoke to them about this. They said that the church would follow its policy and not allow a sealing cancellation without seeking input and comment from the other party unless that other party was excommunicated. They also confirmed that someone who raped and harmed children would be excommunicated. They couldn't explain why the policy was violated in Bill's case. I persisted in asking questions. I never received any answers. Okay? So I think Marilyn is a hero to me in this story, and I've never had the chance to sit down and talk to her or meet her, but like, I understand that for a lot of people, their first reaction is, well, why did she marry this man if these allegations were against him? But, you know, like I said, I think she was just overly trusting, but she also was following this intuition that something was wrong, and she was asking questions of really powerful people, and it had some really negative consequences. For example, Neil A. Maxwell contacted Marilyn Carstenson's bishop, according to her testimony. She says, a few months later, still in 1989, during Relief Society, my bishop called me out of class and said that he had received a call from Elder Maxwell. Okay. Now, one thing to point out, most people know this, but the church is adamant that they don't get involved in cases of discipline and abuse, and that they don't reach down to the local level and that kind of a thing. Marilyn Brady Carstenson's testimony refutes that, right? And we can see clearly that the church leadership is reaching down to the local level. And here's what Elder Maxwell told the bishop. My bishop told me that Elder Maxwell told him that a sister in his ward, meaning Marilyn Brady, was making a lot of noise, and that I was putting him, Elder Maxwell, between a rock and a hard place, and that the bishop needed to stop me. Being a fairly new bishop, he told me he didn't even realize that apostles would contact the bishop directly, and that this was serious. So what we see here is as Marilyn Brady continues to try to get her questions answered, and she goes higher and higher up into the hierarchy of the church leadership reaches back down and starts applying pressure on Marilyn Brady through Elder Maxwell. But it gets even a little bit worse than that. Not a little bit worse than that. It gets worse than that. Because according to Marilyn Brady, in the latter part of 1990, possibly early 1991, I received a letter from the Office of the First Presidency with stamped signatures from all members of the First Presidency sent to me by Secretary M.W., meaning Michael Watson. This letter stated that if I persisted in raising these questions, that I was putting my membership at risk.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. And so let's just stop for 1 second.
She's still married to Bill.
Wow.
Still married to Bill Carstensen, asking questions about the sealing cancellation. And the same men who refused to hold a church disciplinary council for Bill Carstensen and Dick and Brenda Miles were now threatening Marilyn Brady, telling her that if she persisted in asking questions and seeking answers to those questions, that she was putting her membership at risk.
Yeah,
according to her testimony.
I have to make a comment. You know, we've talked to so many people, I mean, Mary Beth, who gave me this little hummingbird, threatened by the church to stay silent and stop talking.
After being on our show.
And several times she'd been threatened. Yeah, and after being on a show, threatened to take this stuff down. It seems in this state we have a problem or a pattern where those who expose the pedophilia, it's those who do the pedophilia, those who are involved in such horrific things,
allegedly,
are safer than those who expose it.
Sure.
You know, you expose it, they attack you with lawfare, but you get involved and you get protected. And you're right, not just Utah, but our focus is our backyard. And you see this pattern with Epstein, you see this pattern with P. Diddy, and I see it all over. And here's another example of this. And this is what this is where the people have to have this. I know this is hard for people. I know it's been so hard for us to deal with this.
Especially with seeing all the recent stuff with the Hamlin case.
But it's painful. You don't want to see this. You don't want it to be true. You know, these are men, like, my foundation is built on these men. Like I love these men. Like I have, like this is, much of my identity is built on these men. And not all of them are bad. You know what I mean? You can't put a blanket, but to see this type of corruption, it's hard. Like this has been so painful.
Sure. Well, I'll just very quickly, like, I can testify to the fact that church leadership gets involved in cases like this. And like what you just said is true. Like, I have recordings of conversations with my stake president from when I was going to him and talking to him about what I was finding in my research, where he first starts out talking about, like, Justin, why are you worried about getting excommunicated for apostasy? What would I ever what would I ever say about you being an apostate? I then have a recording of him reading an email he received from the area authority, gently teaching my stake president about what apostasy is, and asking him, not asking him like directly, but basically inferring that I was an apostate. And then, of course, within a few months, I was excommunicated from the church for talking about another alleged child abuser, Gordon Bowen, who is part of the Hamblin case and is a twice accused child abuser, right? So it's not a question of if the church leaders like get involved in local matters. They do. Like, I have recordings that prove that. So just for what it's worth. And I would agree with you that, like, it feels like in many cases, especially ones where the image and assets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are at stake, the perpetrator is far safer than the people trying to expose the crimes that took place. Not the sins, right? Like, the sins are one thing, but we're talking about crimes that took place.
Tom Stallings and Michael Jensen, the show we did there, is a perfect example of that. Destroyed that man's life for exposing it.
Yeah. So I just want to point out that Marilyn Brady says that this is happening in 1990. There's something else that people need to be aware of that was happening in 1990 that involves Russell M. Nelson, that speaks to his attitude and his behavior towards allegations of abuse. Because in 1990, the Pace memo was released. And again, we just don't have time to go into this very deeply. I have an entire 2-hour presentation on the Pace memo. Most people have heard of the Pace memo, and they understand that it's about allegations of ritual sexual abuse brought to the Strengthening the Church Members Committee by Bishop Glenn L. Pace. Okay, so this is a high-up leader in the church bringing a report to other leaders in the church. What most people don't do is take the time to really go through the Pace memo carefully and understand who the players were. What most people don't understand is that Russell M. Nelson sat on the Strengthening the Church Members Committee that took the Pace memo that contained Bishop Pace's research and his belief that there was ritual abuse happening to children in the Utah Valley, and they took that and they buried it, okay? And they chose to not pursue what Bishop Pace had told them, right? Now, there were some token behaviors, especially once the Pace memo was leaked. But in 1990, Russell M. Nelson sat on the committee that received the Pace memo at the same time that this abuse is happening in Bountiful, right? And so on in Fruit Heights, right? Down in Mount Olympus, all up and down the East Bench, okay? So this is not the kind of thing like Gordon B. Hinckley said that it's a blip here and a blip there. But in the 1990s, in the 1980s and 1990s, it's not a blip here and a blip there. There's an epidemic of abuse happening along the East Bench of Utah. And the church is internally like ordering memorandums to be created so that they can review it. But then when they get the results, they cover it up. Or in the case of like Marilyn Brady, they send her a letter saying, if you continue to pursue this, your membership is in danger, right? So it's pattern.
Wasn't Pace sent away too after that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Australia, if I remember right. And there are people who say that he was, punished for this and sent out and sort of put to pasture. Neil Anderson sort of becomes, some people believe, sort of his handler, sort of a situation. I don't know much about that, but definitely Bishop Pace's church career was it was weird. He was going on this trajectory to where he was in the bishopric, the presiding bishopric, and then all of a sudden it sort of just plateaus or what some people would consider as
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with the Glenn Pace memo, I would highly recommend you do a little research. Maybe we'll bring Justin on to go over that because he does a phenomenal job breaking it down. But it's, he interviewed 60 victims, said he could have easily interviewed 3 times the amount. And he says, he said there's no question this stuff's happening at the highest levels of the church. And he literally said, including people sacrificing, babies. I mean, it is hard to believe. And he testified it's true. And this was the presiding bishop, and then he was silenced, and then the media silenced all this stuff. So this is kind of I don't want to take away from you,
Sure.
but go ahead.
So, and one of the really important, outstanding questions regarding the Pace memo is, did Bishop Pace understand that he was turning over his memorandum to a member of Sigma Chi in Skull and Bones? And if he had known that, would he have responded differently or done something differently, right? My guess is that Bishop Pace had no idea, or Glenn Pace had no idea who he was turning this over to, right? So, again, an outstanding question that nobody's willing to answer. And we're about to lose the entire generation of people who could answer this question, because as I've gone to them and asked them to answer these questions, of course, their response has been silence and punishment, right? So, okay, we've already talked, pretty at length about the personal injury lawsuit that was filed. We talked about the default judgment. For those who are interested, Bill Carstensen was not doing very well financially at this time. He made a few small payments of a couple $100s to the Smith daughters. And then what happened is that Marilyn Carstensen became aware of Bill's abuse of her children. And to her great credit, she went and reported him to authorities. She says, years later in 1995, I learned that Bill had sexually harmed my daughter and sons. I immediately separated from him. I reported the crimes to the police. Before Bill could be prosecuted for those crimes against my children, he committed suicide.
Was he put on a registry once that default judgment happened?
Not that I'm aware of. I have not looked into that, though.
How soon?
All I know is there's a lot of cover up, because if he looked guilty, the church was tied into it.
And what's the time span between the default judgment and his suicide?
Yeah, 1992 is the case. In 1995 is when he commits suicide. Okay. So at this point, the story just kind of goes away. The church PR department, the church has its propaganda arm with the Deseret News. It has the special affairs committee that runs interference with lawyers and so on and so forth. It has Curtin McConkie to take care of many of these issues and that kind of thing. And this story just kind of goes away until we get to the Dick and Brenda Miles case that we came here to talk about. Now, the reason that the Dick and Brenda Miles case was filed was because the Utah legislature passed Utah Code Section 78B-2-308, which extended the statute of limitations in sex abuse cases. So that opened up an opportunity for these victims to file the case against Dick and Brenda Miles, okay? So just keep that in mind, that the legislature, the elected legislature, passed a law that gave victims the opportunity to pursue justice far beyond what they had been able to up to this point. So it was a good law that was passed. But what we're going to see, 2016, okay? Now I'm going to drop this in here really quickly. In 2017, Justin Hoyman, if you look at the news reports, you're always going to see him named as Justin Hoyman, disappears from Salt Lake City, okay? And what you see here from this news clipping is it says, the family of a missing Utah construction worker is desperate for answers years after he was last accounted for, heading out to a Salt Lake City construction site. Justin Hoyman left for work around 6 a.m. on November 20th, 2017. He called his mom along the way, and they made plans to meet for lunch. So Justin Hoyman's mother is Marilyn Brady Carstensen Hoyman, okay? And Justin, so it's in the court documents. For those who want to go see it, it's actually really weird, but all the names are redacted, but in one of the documents, and I don't remember which one exactly right now, it actually names Justin. It has his name, okay?
And he's one of the ones that came forward following this law.
No, he didn't.
No, he didn't come forward because he disappeared. Now, I really don't want to get into like too much conspiracy kind of stuff here, but here are the facts. Justin grew up and he led a really troubled life. He had some injuries and he got prescribed some painkillers and he got addicted to painkillers, and then he was in and out of jail a little bit. But when he disappeared, he was actually in treatment, which theoretically, when he was in treatment, he would have been talking about his past, right? And maybe coming to grips with some of the things that had happened to him as Bill Carstensen's child, okay? So I just want to throw in there that right around this time that this legislature passes this code, you also have Justin Hoyman, or Justin Carstensen, who disappears from Salt Lake City, okay? So that's one of the consequences of not having a church court or turning Bill Carstensen over to the authorities, was that Justin Hoyman lived this very difficult life and eventually ends up being presumed dead. his case with the plague, he's presumed dead at this point because he's been missing for so long. But his family still wants very much. You can find Fox News articles from last year where his family is begging people to help them find him and understand what happened to Justin. Okay, so that's part of the fallout of this case.
Cover-up. It's part of the fallout of the cover-up. Is someone had, in my book, someone had information. Someone was potentially coming forward, and he goes missing. I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, there is no evidence that I'm aware of that happened in that manner, right? And I try to stick very carefully.
Well, I appreciate you doing that, but I'm not going to not do that. I'm not going to not see a connection there. That one of the victims is around the same time this gets reopened, disappears off the face of the earth.
So is he one of the biological kids of Marilyn, or is this
Karsten's? That's Bill Karsten's son from his second wife that he abused because she married him, not because she thought he was a good, faithful LDS guy. Didn't know he was a perp because the church covered it up. And she gets married. He has kids with him, and he starts abusing his kids. And then one of his kids ends up disappearing after.
So he would be one of the John Does.
This is not okay.
John Doe 2 or John Doe, one of the later John Does.
My personal belief is he's John Doe 1. Well, he's not even listed. He's like a John Doe 3. Okay, because
he's missing, right? So he can't be part of the lawsuit because he's no longer.
He has no testimony. Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. Convenient.
Okay. So we have the law passed in 2016. Justin disappears in 2017, and in 2018 the case is filed. The suit explicitly accuses the Miles of lying to the police and influencing the criminal investigation, influencing leaders of the church to ignore church policy and not convene a church disciplinary council against themselves and the plaintiff's father, and further actions which encouraged and enabled defendants and plaintiff's father, Bill Karsten, to escape criminal prosecution and not be excommunicated from the church for the heinous sexual crimes they committed against these children. Okay? So here's Dick and Brenda Miles. One thing that's important to note is that this picture comes from when they were called as mission presidents, which is after the allegations.
What?
Right? So that picture comes from a church news article where they were called as mission presidents.
After this was filed.
They served in the Alpine German-speaking mission from 2011 to 2014.
Okay.
Welcome to Utah.
One thing that's really important to point out is that within hours of the case being filed, and you can see this on the timestamps of the document, right? The case is filed and it's timestamped. Within hours of the case being filed, the Deseret News, through Tad Walsh, okay, I want you to remember that name because it's interesting. He actually is in the news this week for another situation regarding the church abuse hotline. Tad Walsh publishes an article claiming that there was no influence, right, of the criminal investigation or the disciplinary council that should have been held, right? Now, I wish we had time. We're going way over time here, but
no, go. This is important.
Okay. So what's really, I want to do this if we can. Let's see if I can. I want to read this article, okay? This is the article that within hours of the case being filed, which tells you what? Okay, Tad Walsh was tipped off that the case was being filed. And I actually know a little bit of backstory about that. And I'm not sure what I can really share here, but let's just put it this way. I am confident that the church knew that the case was coming, and I'm further confident that the church then turned to Tad Walsh and the Deseret News and had them prepare this. And what I want people to pay attention to is based on what we've read so far in the historical documents, I want people to see what was included in the article and what was left out, okay? And I'm going to go fast.
But I do think it's important to notice that it came out within hours, which means that there was some, conspiring between. How did they know about it? Clearly, something was off there, and this is the problem I have with the Utah media. It's all owned by the same people, covering everything up.
Yeah, and reporters like Tad Walsh, especially, right? Like if you go through his history and just read the articles that he's written, like there are certain people that the church utilizes to do this kind of thing. Okay. Decades-old Bountiful case alleges church connection to abuse allegations. So the first thing to note is that they call it a decades-old Bountiful case. On October 3rd, 2018, when was the case filed? Hours before. It's not about a decades-old case, but they make it seem like this is old news, right? This is journalistic malpractice, right? Trying to make it seem like something is being dredged up, but this isn't. This is a new case that had just been filed hours before. By Tad Walsh, allegations rejected 30 years ago following multiple law enforcement investigations resurfaced Wednesday in a federal lawsuit filed against a daughter and son-in-law of the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The couple was identified only as John and Jane Doe in the suit, but an attorney for the defendants identified them as Brenda and Richard Miles, the daughter and son-in-law of President Russell M. Nelson, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often called the Mormon Church. The lawsuit was filed in U.S. District Court in Utah by 6 unnamed plaintiffs. All the children are stepchildren of a man who died by suicide in 1995. I want to point this out right now. Why do they say a man who died by suicide? That's a really weird way to put that, right? Why would you not say Bill Carstensen? And the answer is pretty obvious, because if they use the name Bill Carstensen in the article, somebody's going to go use Google and type in the name Bill Carstensen, and what are they going to find out? Bill Carstensen was a diagnosed pedophile. But the way that the Deseret News frames it is a man who died by suicide in 1995.
Right?
Yeah.
Pretty clever.
Our news
They
is
revived
disgusting.
They revived allegations that rocked a Bountiful neighborhood in 1986 when they said they were abused as part of a sex ring of adults and babysitters. 3 of the plaintiffs alleged that the plaintiff's father and the Mileses were part of a group who sexually assaulted them as children when their ages ranged from newborn to 8 years old. The alleged assaults took place at touching parties at homes in the Mueller Park area of Bountiful, according to the complaint. Within hours on Wednesday, the Mileses filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit. The motion said the plaintiff's claims are false and horrific and are barred by the statute of limitations. Okay? So hold on to that, because we know that the law was passed that extended, but their argument was that the claim was barred by the statute of limitations. In a statement, the Mileses described what they called long ago debunked accusations. Notice that word, debunked, right? Always, like, the church is always going to use words like debunked, satanic panic, false memories, so on and so forth. They called them long ago debunked accusations as patently false and deeply, utterly offensive. Child abuse is evil, but so is a false accusation of child abuse, said the Miles' attorney, Jim Jardine, of the law firm Ray, Quinney, and Nebaker. So one thing to point out about Jim Jardine that the article failed to point out is that Jim Jardine is also a member of Skull and Bones, okay? And he was the one who was hired to defend Dick and Brenda Miles, despite it not really being his area of expertise, which I'll show here in a little bit. Idaho attorney Craig Vernon filed the complaint 3 days before the church's semi-annual general conference, alleging a cover-up by the church, which it denied. Vernon of the law firm James Vernon & Weeks in Coeur d'Alene also represents McKenna Denson, so they're trying to tie him to another controversial case, right? McKenna Denson, another high-profile lawsuit against the church. Vernon did not respond to multiple requests for comment Wednesday. Under Utah federal court rules, he has 28 days to respond. The lawsuit includes 9 exhibits. 6 are declarations made by the children or stepchildren. The other 3 are from their mothers and a psychiatrist who treated the children in 1986. 3 children allege in signed exhibits that they remember being sexually assaulted in the touching parties by their father, their paternal grandmother, the Mileses, a teenage babysitter, and numerous others. 2 stepchildren said they were raped by their stepfather. 1 child and 1 stepchild said they don't remember being assaulted, but they were told they were by their siblings, parents, and therapists. A 7th child provided an exhibit, but she is not listed as a plaintiff in the suit. The suit graphically details repeated sexual assaults and rape of the plaintiffs when they were young children. Still no mention of the fact that Bill Carstensen was involved and is a diagnosed pedophile, right? It's all just allegations, right? We have never abused these children or anyone else, the Miles has said in their statement. To do so would be contrary to our beliefs, our principles, our character, and the way we have always lived our lives. Police investigated these allegations against us more than 30 years ago and found no evidence to support them. Okay, we're just not going to talk about that. To protect ourselves from the specter of false allegations, we voluntarily took a polygraph test. The results of the tests, which we took in 1986, support the reality that we did not sexually abuse these children. The lawsuit also claims the Mileses utilized their status within the church, both as leaders in their own right and as the daughter and son-in-law of an apostle of the church, to cover up the crimes that they committed against Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, and John Doe 1. The lawsuit infers that President Nelson, who became an apostle in 1984, used his influence to protect the father and the Mileses from both the criminal investigation and church discipline. This would have been a good point in the article to talk about how Russell M. Nelson received abuse cover-up instructions from David Eccles Hardy. But do they mention that? No. No mention of the fact that he received abuse cover-up instructions. It just infers. They don't talk about the actual testimony. They use this language that it infers that President Nelson used his influence, okay? The suit explicitly accuses the Mileses of lying to the police and influencing the criminal investigation and so on and so forth, okay? The church strongly denies the claim, that President Nelson or any church official used any influence on the criminal investigation or church discipline. These allegations of interference or cover-up are baseless and offensive, the church said in a statement. Law enforcement investigated this matter in the 1980s and took no action against the church or its leaders. We will continue to act responsibly and appropriately in addressing these matters. The stake president at the time, Craig Smith, said neither the Mileses nor any church leader influenced his decision about church discipline for the plaintiff's father or anyone else. No one from the church told me what to do about whether members of the stake should or should not be disciplined, Smith said in a statement. Decisions about members of my stake were left up to me as the stake president, which is probably literally true, right? Literally, probably that's true. But I think it's highly in question whether or not there was any influence, right? Or whether there were any conversations or whether there was a letter provided saying, don't do this, but it's your decision, President, right? And as we all know, if an apostle tells a stake president what to do, the stake president is going to do what the apostle tells him to do. Okay. Now, here's the thing that I really want to point out. The Miles' attorney, Jim Jardine, Skull and Bones member Jim Jardine, said the allegations arose from the work of a quote-unquote controversial therapist, Barbara Snow, who was investigated for quote-unquote planting false memories in patients. So here's where the Deseret News and Jim Jardine try to turn this into a satanic panic, false memory case. But as we talked about earlier, this is only true of Plaintiff Group 1, the Smiths. Okay, Plaintiff Group 2, Marilyn Brady Carstensen and her children, have nothing to do with this controversial therapist, Barbara Snow, or false memories. Okay, and I'm going to cover this a little bit. I have a really important question that everybody needs to answer for themselves about whether this is a case of satanic panic, ritual abuse, or false memories.
Yeah,
okay?
by the way, I think Barbara Snow is actually awesome. It's funny how they find people who call these people out and try to destroy their lives.
Yeah, so Barbara Snow plays an interesting part in many, many cases of abuse. And I will give it to Jim Jardine that utilizing Ms. Snow as sort of a straw man argument to draw attention away from the actual allegations and frame this in the media and in court as a case of satanic panic and so on and so forth is a brilliant legal move, right? I have no doubt that Jim Jardine is a brilliant lawyer. The question is what he did moral and ethical, and is it accurate?
And it was what the Deseret News, the church's media outlet, moral and ethical. And this is why we'd have to do this podcast, because you got Deseret News and KSL covering up all the corruption of their politicians, covering up corruption like this, and the good people in the state of Utah have their heads in the sand thinking all is well in Zion because you got garbage media spinning lies about every important piece of corruption happening in this state.
Right. So let's look. We're going to go backwards here really quickly because I just want to point this out. Here's James Jardines, and I'm probably saying his name wrong. I think I've heard people say it a different way, and so I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly. But here's his page from his law firm that describes what kind of lawyer he is. Mr. Jardine's practice focuses on prosecuting and defending commercial litigation matters and emphasizes complex business, antitrust, securities, and intellectual property litigation. He has represented a wide variety of local, regional, and national businesses in major litigation in Utah and other states. So if you were charged with child sex abuse, why would you hire Jim Jardine to defend you if he's a commercial litigation lawyer, right? And I think this is just me, right? But the answer is it's not because of the type of lawyer that he is. It's because of the secret society that he's a member of and the access it gives him to places like the Utah Supreme Court, which is where this ends up kind of everything goes sideways. Okay, but we're going to get there. Before we get there, I just want you to note that Jim Jardine frames this as a Barbara Snow false memory situation. And the Deseret News and Tad Walsh take that and they run with it, and that's how they present it to the public. But in the documents themselves, which the Deseret News never mentions, is the fact that at least one of the victims had multiple surgeries because of the abuse. Okay, and I have redacted this because it's, very personal surgeries, but like people can go find it. It's not redacted in the document itself. As a result of the abuse inflicted upon her by perpetrator, Jane Doe 4 had to undergo reconstructive surgery on certain parts of her body at age 15 due to excessive scar tissue. Later in life, Jane Doe 4 additionally had to have part of her blank removed, another body part, due to excessive scar tissue, causing all her children to be born prematurely. So here's my question to Jim Jardine. When is the last time that a false memory led to multiple surgeries due to excessive scar tissue of the genitalia of little girls, 15-year-old girls? Okay. And this is where I get a little bit worked up, right? And this is where I get myself in trouble, because you better believe that Jim Jardine knew that Jane Doe 4 had surgery, because he's a good lawyer and I'm sure he read the documents. But when he went to the press, he ignores the fact that there's a diagnosed pedophile involved. He ignores the fact that there is a 15-year-old girl who had to have surgery. He ignores many, many relevant facts, right? And he presents it as this is a problem of a controversial therapist and implanted memories. And I have a real problem with that personally.
Yeah, the people should have a real problem with all of this.
Okay. Not only that, but Jim Jardine lied in his Mitchell case Utah Supreme Court briefing. Okay. So the way that this worked is that when the Miles case was filed, there was another case that had already been started. It was the Mitchell case that had to do with a similar issue regarding this statute of limitations and the law that the Utah legislature had passed in 2016. So Jim Jardine's legal strategy was to say, hey, judge, you don't want to rule on the Miles case until the Mitchell case has been decided, because depending on how the Mitchell case is decided will greatly affect whether or not this case, the Miles case, can be heard at all. Jardine then gets his way into the Utah Supreme Court in some really unusual circumstances. So the oral arguments had already been completed in the Mitchell case, but Jim Jardine was allowed to enter a brief in that Mitchell case on behalf of the Miles, making their argument that the legislature had passed a law that was unconstitutional, and that they had taken away the vested right of the perpetrator, right? That the vested right being the statute of limitations, and that the Utah legislators had taken away the vested right of the perpetrators, right? And that these victims should not be allowed to sue the perpetrators because of the statute of limitations. Okay, so the Utah Supreme Court allows Jim Jardine, Skull and Bones member Jim Jardine, to enter this brief. It takes them multiple years to come to a decision. Okay, which is highly unusual if you look at Utah Supreme Court cases. Normally, it doesn't take multiple years. Okay, and from what I've heard from the people involved in this, and again, this is like, I can't prove this with documents, but what I've heard is that there was just a lot of heartburn because everybody kind of understood what was going on, right? And if they ruled in this Mitchell case that the law was unconstitutional, it wasn't just Mitchell and it wasn't just the Karstensen and Miles victims that were going to lose their right to sue. It was an entire generation of Utah sex abuse victims who were going to lose their right to seek justice in the Utah court system. So my understanding is that there was a lot of heartburn about this decision, but in the end, Jardine wins the argument. The Mitchell case is dismissed, and because the Mitchell case is dismissed, the Miles case is dismissed on procedural grounds, okay? Which keeps Russell M. Nelson from being deposed, okay? Craig Vernon wanted to depose Russell M. Nelson, and they wanted to expedite it because Russell M. Nelson was old. Nobody realized that Russell M. Nelson was going to live to be 101, 100, whatever years old. And so Vernon was asking to expedite this case so that they could depose President Nelson. And the church, of course, was very afraid of this because here's the problem. The church's corporate structure is that they're a corporate soul. And by the time this lawsuit is filed, Russell M. Nelson is what's called the incumbent of the corporate soul. And in a corporate soul, the incumbent is the owner of all the assets of the church. That's why Russell M. Nelson is one of the richest men on the face of this earth, because he's the incumbent of the corporation. If he's found to have gotten involved and interfered in this situation, what's at risk? Not just the image of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its profit, but the assets of the corporation known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as well. It was incredibly important and critical to the church that this case never go to discovery, that nobody ever get deposed, that it never get in front of a jury, that it never be decided on the merits or anything along those lines. They had to engage in this lawfare in order to get rid of this case, in order to protect the image of President Nelson and the church and its assets.
So
It seems pretty clear.
does the dismissal of these two cases then amend the 2016 code?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't remember what happens here. I believe that what happens is that this part of the law is obviously considered unconstitutional and struck down, but the law itself still stands, and there are still some victims. The law just kind of reverts back to what it was before, and now that statute of limitations is back to what it was, and I'm not a lawyer, right, and I'm not an expert in this, but across the country, laws for sex abuse victims make it very difficult to pursue justice because they always have this short window in which you're able to make a claim, right? And so Utah goes back to one of these states where it's difficult to seek justice due to the statute of limitations, et cetera, et cetera.
Justin, we've got a question for you. Where Tyler, wasn't there something with the social media fast that tied into this?
There was. Yeah. So when the case was filed, you noticed in the article it talked about how it was 3 days before General Conference. And when the case comes out, President Nelson gets up in front of the church and declares a media fast and asks, I believe, Tyler, you may have to correct me here, but I believe it was at a women's session, if I remember right. But I could be wrong about that.
I remember it.
Do you remember it? Okay. Well, everybody can go back and find out. But yeah, you can find this clip of President Nelson saying, hey, we need to take a break from social media and everybody needs to do a 7-day fast. And it just so happens to be right around the time that his daughter is back in the news being accused of child sex abuse. So yes, that is a part of this story. You're right. Okay.
Wow. Anything else you have to share before we wrap up?
So I just want to close the conclusion. It should take about 10 minutes, maybe at the most. I just want to ask again, what is truth? So in this case, we're confronted with some really difficult evidence that a diagnosed pedophile and family members of the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were involved in a child sex abuse ring. The evidence is in the form of sworn testimony that was sworn under the penalty of perjury. And on the other hand, we have President Nelson and the church telling us that we need to trust these 15 men completely. And so I'm not here to tell people what they should or should not believe in, what is and is not truth, but we do all have the obligation to determine for ourselves what is truth, especially in important cases like this, because it's extremely important that we decide for ourselves what it is that is and is not true. Now, I get called a conspiracy theorist all the time, and I just want to take 2 seconds, and I want to point out that the conspiracy here has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, okay? So in a general conference back in the 1890s, I believe, here is an epistle from the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, read in general conference. It says, "The scenes which we are now witnessing in this territory are the result of a deep-laid and carefully planned conspiracy which has been in process of formation for years. Its originators knew the elements they had to deal with, and by cunning contrivance, they have effected a wonderful combination. Religious and irreligious, ministers in sacerdotal robes and atheistic scoffers, businessmen of integrity and blacklegs, temperance men and drunkards, men of strict morality and pimps and harlots are crowded together on the platform they have constructed, and they find no inconvenience from each other's companionship. Each is made to believe that it is to his direct interest to combine to destroy Mormonism. A more motley collection of human beings was never witnessed." Okay? So if people want to talk about conspiracy and conspiracy theories, they can go back to General Conference and see that the first presidency of the church in General Conference was writing epistles about the conspiracy to destroy Mormonism. In addition to that, we have a second witness from John A. Widtsoe, who in his book, In a Sunlit Land, testifies to overhearing two non-member members of the Board of Regents, so non-members of the church, but members of the University of Utah Board of Regents, talking about how they wanted to overthrow the state of Utah by infiltrating the University of Utah and training the children, the young men and women, away from the teachings of Mormonism. So we have multiple witnesses of a conspiracy to overthrow Utah and Mormonism. And then we have cases like the Miles case, where we have members of secret societies who appear to be conspiring with each other to hide evidence, right, out of the public sphere at least, and protect each other through oaths that they made with each other. And so the final question that I think we need to ask ourselves is, what manner of men engage in the type of behavior that we have observed in the testimonies that were given in the Miles case and the timeline that I presented today? And of course, every member of the church is familiar with the Gadianton robbers, right? The Gadianton robbers, it says here, are a recurring theme in the Book of Mormon, appearing in the books of Helaman, 3rd Nephi, 4th Nephi, and Mormon. Their story serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of secret wickedness and the importance of righteous living. So I'm not here to claim that these members of Skull and Bones are necessarily modern-day Gadianton robbers. What I'm here to say is that it's important that we talk about it. It's important that we have the opportunity to discuss it. And I would say that it's important that these leaders of the church quit hiding in ivory towers in Salt Lake City and get out here and have the conversation with us. Here's the last thing I'll say. One of the things that I often hear from members of the church is, well, many of the prophets did things that weren't good, right? And they point to Alma the Younger, they point to Saul, or they point to Moses committing manslaughter, or Nephi murdering Laban, or so on and so forth. To which I simply say this: that is true. Like, we should not expect the leaders of the church to be perfect men, or even good men necessarily, or especially early in their lives. But the pattern in the scriptures is always that when those men have a conversion experience and are asked to explain their past behavior, they don't go hide in ivory towers and refuse to talk about it and threaten to punish people who want to talk about their past. What they do is they come out publicly and they bear powerful witness about their conversion experience and why it is that they should be trusted. In the case of Russell M. Nelson, we have no such conversion experience. Okay, the closest that we have is in his book, his autobiography, From Heart to Heart. He talks about how he feels ambivalent about his membership in Sigma Chi and Skull and Bones. But ambivalence is not repentance. And, Russell Nelson is almost 101 years old. There's not much time left for him to come out and share his conversion story and help us understand, not just make the claim that we should trust him, but give us evidence as to why we should trust him and these other 15 men, especially in cases of abuse. So I know we're really over time, but one last thing is I just want to point out, we talked about Tad Walsh, okay? Just this week, Fair Mormon had their conference, or Fair, I can't remember what they're called anymore, had their conference, and they brought a Curtin McConkie lawyer and therapist from the abuse hotline, okay, to talk about the abuse hotline. And of course, they say that the Latter-day Saint Abuse Helpline and clergy privilege protect children best, church attorney says. And who wrote the article? Tad Walsh, okay? So if people wonder if this is relevant to today, it's literally relevant to today. Because just this week, as we continue to have this conversation about how the church handles abuse, Tad Walsh is still out there writing articles, just like he did in the Miles case, that don't present all the evidence, but only present the side that Curtin McConkie and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and men like Russell M. Nelson want you to hear. So I would encourage everybody to just see the patterns and do the research for yourself and make your own decisions about whom you should trust and whom you should sustain.
Justin, thank you for everything.
Any questions?
No, I appreciate everything you shared. And to our audience, if you'd like to have him on again, he does some incredible research. We'd be happy to have him back. Tyler, as we're wrapping up, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, it just makes you sick, doesn't it? The only thing I can compare it to is having a loved one receive a diagnosis of cancer, right? When you get this type of news, ignoring it becomes fatal, right? It becomes impossible to ignore. It becomes the most important thing in your life, and it occupies your thoughts continuously. That's kind of how I feel, and I know that's how you guys feel as well, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. The plague, this cancer that we're dealing with, is child sexual abuse and cover-up and silence. And if it's not addressed, it will be terminal. I just want to throw up in the hopes that it will help me feel better, just like Jane Doe 1 said. Right? Speaking up is healing. So thank you to Jason and Alexia for providing a platform and an opportunity for us to speak so that healing can take place. And a big thank you to Justin. I know the hell that he's been put through for standing up for what he knows to be true. It has cost him dearly. Thank you.
Alexia?
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I also want to reiterate what Tyler said. Thank you so much, Justin. That was really eye-opening for me. I read Paper Dolls, or skimmed it, I should say, because it was just so tough to read when you hear some of the accounts from the children's mouths. I mean, it's even more sickening than some of what you were reading earlier, Tyler. So when we did the stalling show several months ago about the Jensen case, one of the things I don't even know if we followed up with after was, even after Jensen was convicted and remains in prison, which fortunately saw its day in court, one of the things that came out that week, actually, first it was Floodlit, and then it was actually mainstream news, was the court findings where basically, and we can throw up an article, so I'm not stating this wrong, but basically that the LDS Church, since they were involved with that cover-up, their insurance company was not willing to pay the $60+ million that went involved in covering up just that one sexual predator, Michael Jensen. That came out the same week. So basically what the court said was insurance should not have to pay for something of a cover-up of this nature, and this would be on the church, which, side note, is also where tithing money is going towards. So that was the first I really had my eyes open to these cover-ups. Fortunately, that got its day in court, which we didn't have a chance to show after that show. But it's hearing this stuff and seeing the decades worth of research behind it, reading some of the claims of some of the survivors, the ones that are willing to come forward and having gone into hiding. We know this is real. We know this is very real, not just from the 80s and 90s, but this is very alive and well, even just in our time, that we've seen. And things haven't made sense over the years, and then you have things like the social media fast and light bulbs go off. So I'm still just digesting everything myself. This feels like our first Shadows of Power show with Goel going into the Hamblin documents. But if you are still interested in learning any of the things referenced earlier, we do have a show with a therapist we filmed earlier this year where we go into false memory syndrome. We also did a show about a year ago on the Glenn Pace memo where we dissect that. Justin, we would love to have you back for your take on that.
Yeah, I'd like to redo that with Justin because he's got a breakdown that's insane.
So there are resources online. There's plenty that is available online. And finally, I just want to say again, none of us are suicidal. And we continue to bring this to light because apparently no one else is willing or brave enough to do so, including our state media. So thank you, Justin.
Well, you know, this has been just a year, Alexia, and I'll never forget. Once the lawsuit came, we made it a commitment to start speaking to survivors of all forms of abuse in the state. And the more we've been talking about it, it's been interesting, the people who've reached out to us. And not just people, well, actually, just a lot of survivors of abuse. But we have spoken to family members of the 12. We have spoken to family members of very high level, highly named people in the Hamblin victim statements. We've spoken to family members from them. And one thing they are telling us is that we are on the right track and that these things are happening. you know, I know these things are hard to hear. This has been extremely painful. Actually, there's been a level of cognitive dissonance we have fought. And had we not talked and seen people face to face, we wouldn't believe it ourselves. But what's the right thing to do when you find out that kids are being abused and that our leaders are protecting perpetrators? And that as a result, we have a culture of abuse in this state. You know, silence in the face of evil is silence itself.
Evil.
Excuse me. That's why I need this lady. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. And I know people hear this, and the first thing is you don't want it to be true. And what's the natural thing is to just kind of turn away and leave it alone, and let's just forget about it. That's been going on in this state for generations. And as we talked about at the beginning, dragons, when you leave them alone, they only get bigger, and they only end up torturing and hurting more victims. I just believe we, the people, have a responsibility to stand and fight. I believe these children, if we think we can sit back and just hope that our leaders in the justice system, our politicians, you know, the church are going to take care of this problem, I just don't think God sent us to sit on the sidelines. I think, in fact, the thing that amazes me is you look at Epstein, you look at everything going on in this country in Hollywood and in the darkness that is raging. The state that should be leading the charge against the fight for battle of evils, right, is you. It's Utah. It's here. It's the incredible people who I think were sent for such a time. And I just have to wonder when I hear things like this, if maybe the media, if maybe there's a reason our heads are in the sand, if maybe there's a reason that we're sitting on the sidelines, and because I can tell you what, if I was the adversary, that is what I would want, is for this state to be sitting on the sidelines when things are becoming so, when we should be standing and fighting that dragon, the same battle that's been going on since the beginning of this earth. And I don't know, I hear this today, I think about, you know, when I was during COVID and we were seeing these lies coming from all these dark global agencies about this jab. And I knew it was a lie. We knew it was not true. And one thing we learned, that silence feeds on lies, and that endorsing the lie is a gross tyranny. And when I hear from, you know, the same person we've been talking about, that jab is quoting, when he's quoting people that it's safe and effective and calling it a literal godsend, my spirit didn't resonate. And I believe that God has a pattern of, he tells that we are supposed to receive our own witness. And my spirit said, no, do not take that. It is not from God. It is not a literal godsend. I look at the corruption in this state, how we're embracing we're moving left, how we're embracing every globalist progressive Agenda 2030 policy. How we're the only state outside of Utah that invites the United Nations, you know, that has their meetings in. And I just have to say, when you look at all the corruption in this state, upon the political corruption, I can't not see the ties to what we're talking about today. And again, I don't know why we're not leading the charge against it, but instead we seem to be embracing it. And it's been hard. It's been painful because these are my heroes, and like I said, this is my foundation. And you know, I love the gospel. But I will tell you this: we've talked to enough victims, and I have held videos back, videos we've recorded with people naming current sitting temple presidents is involved in the most grotesque type of abuse you can imagine, and they're still sitting temple presidents with evidence. We've recorded there. We're holding those. We've recorded victims of all sorts of abuse that have named different members of even the 12, and we've held those back. But at this point, after Alexia and I wanted to flee this state, after we'd had enough, it was just too much to bear, and we wanted out. And it was very clear to us that we didn't have a choice, that if we tried to leave, everything that has been given to us and to me would be taken. The only thing I can compare it to is Jonah and the well, and we have responsibilities to shine a light. And at this point, this was a turning point, this show, and we will now start to show some of the things we have held back because it's too heavy. And I realize it will come at a cost. I realize my concerns is our platforms getting canceled. but to hold back my opinions and the things I've been shown would be an offense to God, and that is something Alexia and I have prayed about. And not that we're any great righteous people, because we're not, but we are committed to doing what's right. And so, anyways, we put this out there. It's on God. It's on you what goes on now, because we're done. We had to get it out. And it's up to you. If this goes nowhere, I don't care. It's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to get it out there. And I want to thank Tyler and Justin and my beautiful wife and all those behind the scenes that have helped our studio. And, you know, we're doing all we can. And it's not fun. It's not, we don't want to do it, but it's done. This part's done. And now it's on you guys. So good luck with that. Thank you guys for watching.